The veil tore less than 1 hour before Lady Beatrice Lydgate was to marry a man who had never asked for her. It happened with a soft, fatal whisper of lace beneath Lady Drusilla's impatient fingers. And for one suspended moment, every woman in the dressing room stared at the small rip as if it were a wound society itself might notice from the chapel pews. Beatrice did not gasp. She did not weep. She had learned, in 24 years under her uncle's roof, that distress was useful only to those who wished to study it. Instead, she held out her hand. "Give it to me, please." Lady Drusilla Lydgate, who had been born with an expression of permanent disappointment and had spent her married life perfecting it, looked down her narrow nose. "There is no time for your little habits, Beatrice. The carriage is waiting." Across the room, Lady Octavia Lydgate stood before the long glass, in a gown of pale blue silk that made her look like a portrait of spring regrettably forced to witness winter. She was not dressed for mourning, though she had killed a marriage that morning. She was not dressed for shame, though she had placed it neatly upon Beatrice's shoulders. She was dressed to be admired. Even now, with the chapel filling and half of London whispering, Octavia adjusted one pearl at her throat and smiled at her own reflection. "It is only a veil, Mamma. No one will be looking at that. No one will be looking at the veil," Beatrice thought. "They will be looking at me, the substitute bride." The cousins taken down from the shelf because the first ornament had refused to be displayed. She stepped toward the little work table near the window, where grey London light lay thinly upon scissors, pins, and a folded square of linen. From the pocket of her wedding gown, she drew a small silver thimble engraved with a single worn letter, B. Her mother's thimble had been the only thing Lord Edmund had not thought valuable enough to lock away after the old Countess of Lydgate died. To Beatrice, it was worth more than all the jewels Octavia had tried on and rejected before breakfast. She slipped it over her finger. The metal was cool, familiar, honest. "Beatrice," Lady Drusilla said sharply, "do not make a spectacle of yourself." Beatrice threaded the needle with hands that did not tremble until no one was watching them closely enough to see. "I believe the spectacle has already been arranged." Octavia turned, her blue eyes bright with warning. "That is unkind." Beatrice lifted the torn lace. "No. It is accurate." Silence settled over the room, not loud enough to be called scandal, but sharp enough to cut. A maid near the wardrobe lowered her eyes. Lady Drusilla's mouth tightened. Octavia flushed, which made her look prettier and therefore more dangerous. Until dawn, Octavia had been promised to Alistair Vale, Duke of Harrowden, a man known in drawing rooms as the Cold Duke, and in certain frightened family conversations, as a husband no sensible young woman would choose unless ambition had swallowed imagination. He was rich, powerful, and said to possess a stare that could empty a room of falsehood. Last night Octavia had decided that a title was not worth a lifetime beside a man who might never soften for her. This morning, Lord Edmund had decided his niece Beatrice was an adequate solution. Beatrice, daughter of the late Earl of Lydgate. Beatrice, raised in the smaller bedchamber after her father's death, and reminded every Michaelmas that gratitude was cheaper than independence. Beatrice, who had no fortune anyone admitted to, no mother to defend her, and no habit of being chosen while a prettier woman remained available. The needle passed through the lace, once, twice-ness. Small stitches, nearly invisible. That had always been her skill. Mending what others tore, then stepping back before anyone praised the repair. Downstairs, wheels sounded over stone. Another carriage arriving. More witnesses, more mouths to carry the story from Mayfair to every breakfast table by tomorrow morning. Lady Drusilla moved to the door and listened as if society itself had come to collect a debt. "Your uncle is growing impatient. Then he may enjoy the novelty," Beatrice said, and bit the thread clean because the scissors had slid too far away. Octavia gave a small laugh. "You speak very boldly for someone being rescued." Beatrice looked at her cousin in the glass. Octavia had the sort of beauty poets wasted ink upon: golden hair, delicate throat. A complexion that suggested sorrow would only improve it. Beatrice had darker hair, steadier eyes, and a face people called sensible when they wished to avoid calling it plain. She had been described as useful often enough to distrust the compliment. "Is that what you call it?" she asked. "Rescue?" Octavia's smile faltered. "What else should one call becoming a duchess when one had no prospect yesterday?" "Convenient," Beatrice said. "For everyone except the bride." Lady Drusilla crossed the room in a rustle of silk. "Enough. You will not carry bitterness into that chapel. Your uncle has done more for you than most guardians would have done. He has kept you under this roof. He has fed you. He has presented you when it was appropriate. If circumstances have provided an elevation beyond your expectations, you will show humility. Humility." The word had been placed before Beatrice so often it had lost all holiness. It meant silence when Octavia took her ribbons. It meant smiling when Lord Edmund used her mother's sitting room as a place to store ledgers. It meant thanking Lady Drusilla for gowns altered from someone else's body and someone else's season. It meant remembering that her father's title had not saved her from dependence once the estate, the accounts, and the keys passed into her uncle's careful hands. Beatrice smoothed the repaired veil across her lap. The tear had not vanished, but it had been persuaded into dignity. "I shall be humble where humility is owed." Lady Drusilla stared. "And where it is not?" Beatrice rose. The wedding gown was not hers. Not truly. It had been altered in haste from Octavia's measurements, pinned tighter at the waist, and let down clumsily at the hem. It smelled faintly of lavender water and panic. Still, when Beatrice stood, the silk settled around her as if it had no memory of belonging to anyone else. "There, I shall be civil." Octavia's eyes narrowed. "You think he will thank you for this?" That struck closer than Beatrice wished. The Duke of Harrowden had not sent flowers. He had not sent a personal message asking whether she consented, though consent among families like theirs was often treated as a decorative courtesy. He had sent one note to Lord Edmund after being informed that Octavia would not appear. "The ceremony will proceed." 4 words, cold enough to be carved on stone. Beatrice had read them because Lord Edmund, in his agitation, had left the paper open on the breakfast table. The handwriting had been severe, black, and controlled, not angry. That unsettled her most of all. An angry man might be appealed to. A cold one had already decided which feelings were irrelevant. The maid came forward with the veil, hands fluttering. Beatrice took it gently from her. "Thank you, Mary." The girl blinked, surprised to be noticed in the room where everyone else had forgotten she could hear. "Yes, my lady." Lady Drusilla frowned at the softness. "Do not encourage familiarity today." Beatrice turned. "Kindness is not familiarity." Again, silence. Outside, a clock began to strike 11. Each measured note seemed to travel through the walls, down the staircase, out into the street, and onward to the chapel where guests waited to watch a woman take another woman's place. Lady Drusilla seized the veil and fixed it over Beatrice's dark hair with brisk, unforgiving motions. Pins pressed too close to the scalp. Beatrice did not flinch. Octavia watched from the glass, and for the first time that morning, envy slipped through her beauty like a crack under paint. Not because she wanted the Duke. Perhaps she did not. But she wanted the room to continue revolving around the fact that she had refused him. She wanted the power of being desired, even by the man she had rejected. Beatrice's obedience had been expected. Her composure had not. A knock sounded. Lord Edmund entered without waiting. He was a handsome man in late middle age, silver at the temples, sorrow arranged upon his face for public use. His black coat was immaculate. His debts, Beatrice suspected, were not. His gaze moved over Octavia first, softening with irritation and indulgence, then landed on Beatrice as one might inspect a signed document. "You will do," he said. "Not beautiful, not fortunate, not forgiven. You will do." Beatrice folded her gloved hands. How comforting. His eyes sharpened. This family stands at the edge of ruin because of foolish nerves and girlish theatrics. You have been granted the chance to preserve your name and ours. Do not mistake this moment for a personal triumph. Beatrice wanted, suddenly and fiercely, to ask him what had become of her mother's Small inheritance, her father's private letters, the account books removed from the blue sitting room after the funeral. But that question had lived unanswered for too many years to be wasted in a dressing room while a chapel waited. So she only said, "I understand perfectly, uncle. I am to save the family by disappearing into a title." Lord Edmund's face darkened. Lady Drusilla inhaled. Octavia looked delighted and afraid. Then a footman appeared at the open door, carrying a folded note on a silver tray. "From Harrowden House, my lord." Lord Edmund snatched it, broke the seal, and read. Whatever he found there drained the colour from his mouth. "Well?" Lady Drusilla demanded. He crushed the paper in his fist, before Beatrice could see more than the strong black slant of the Duke's hand. "The carriage must leave at once." Beatrice stepped forward. "Is there a message for me?" Lord Edmund looked at her as if she had asked whether the Archbishop had written a poem in her honour. "For you? I am the bride, am I not?" The question hung in the room, simple and dangerous. Octavia looked away first. Lord Edmund's fingers tightened around the note. "His Grace expects punctuality." "How intimate," Beatrice said. Lady Drusilla made a sound of outrage, but Lord Edmund had already turned toward the stairs. "Come." The maid lifted Beatrice's train. Beatrice paused only long enough to touch the silver thimble through the thin fabric of her pocket, making certain it was still there. Her one inheritance, her one witness. Her one small piece of a woman who had once whispered, when Beatrice was 6 years old and frightened of a storm, "Stand straight, my darling. Thunder is only noise." The hallway outside smelled of beeswax and hothouse flowers. Servants lined the walls with lowered eyes, all pretending not to know that history had changed brides overnight. Beatrice descended the staircase behind Lord Edmund, with Lady Drusilla and Octavia following close enough to make retreat impossible. At the front door, the carriage waited beneath a pale sky. London moved around them as it always did, indifferent to private ruin. Wheels rattled over the street. A flower seller called from the corner. Somewhere nearby, a church bell answered the hour. Beatrice placed one foot on the carriage step. Octavia's voice floated behind her, sweet as sugared poison. "Do try to look grateful, cousin. Men like the Duke of Harrowden don't enjoy being embarrassed." Beatrice turned. Through the veil, her cousin's beauty blurred, which improved it. "Then he and I already have something in common." She entered the carriage before anyone could answer. The door closed. The city shifted outside the window, all grey stone, black iron, and faces turning as the Lydgate carriage moved toward the chapel. Beatrice sat alone on the forward seat, hands folded, spine straight, the repaired veil resting against her cheek. She did not pray for love. She did not pray for happiness. Those seemed too extravagant for a woman being delivered in place of someone else. She prayed only for one thing: "Let me not bow my head." The carriage slowed after less than 2 miles, then stopped before the chapel. Through the glass, Beatrice saw the crowd, the polished steps, the open doors, the dark press of hats and bonnets waiting for the story to begin. Then she saw him. Alistair Vale, Duke of Harrowden, stood at the foot of the chapel steps in a black coat, cut with severe perfection, his expression unreadable, his stillness more commanding than any shout. He did not look toward Octavia's carriage behind hers. He did not look toward Lord Edmund. His gaze found Beatrice through the window, then dropped to the hand pressed against her pocket, where the silver thimble lay hidden beneath silk. For the first time that morning, Beatrice forgot to breathe. The Duke knew. Somehow, impossibly, the coldest man in England had recognized the smallest thing she owned. For one breathless instant, Lady Beatrice Lydgate sat in the carriage and understood that the morning had not reached its worst humiliation yet. The Duke of Harrowden had seen the thimble, not the gown hurriedly altered to fit a woman for whom it had never been sewn, not the veil mended in silence, not the trembling of her gloved hand against the silk pocket where the small silver keepsake rested. He had seen the thimble itself, or somehow known it was there, and the knowledge struck her more sharply than any insult Octavia could have offered from the carriage behind. Lord Edmund opened the door, before Beatrice could gather herself. "Remember," he said under his breath, his public smile already fixed in place. "Gratitude." Beatrice looked past him to the chapel steps. The Duke had not moved. His gaze had lifted back to her face, and there was nothing warm in it, nothing soft enough to be mistaken for welcome. Yet neither was there surprise. That unsettled her most of all. "I shall remember everything," she said. Lord Edmund's smile tightened. "That is precisely what concerns me." He offered his hand, not as a kindness, but as a stage direction. Beatrice accepted it because the crowd was watching. She descended from the carriage into the pale London light, and the murmurs began at once. They did not rise loudly. People of rank seldom needed volume to wound. A rustle travelled through the waiting guests, silk against silk, curiosity against cruelty. Faces turned beneath bonnets trimmed with feathers. Gentlemen paused mid-conversation. A lady near the chapel door lifted her fan, not to hide her words, but to make them more desirable. "That is not Lady Octavia. No, it is the cousin. Poor thing. Fortunate thing, surely. A substitute bride, if ever there was one." Beatrice heard each phrase because humiliation had a way of sharpening the ear. It also sharpened the spine. She stepped forward with the repaired veil, trembling against her cheek, and held her chin level. The chapel doors stood open behind the Duke, showing candles, white flowers, and rows filled with London society. The scene should have belonged to a bride cherished by family, blessed by expectation, and admired before witnesses. Instead, it was a theatre of calculation. At the foot of the steps, Alistair Vale extended his hand. He wore black with severe elegance, his cravat tied with exacting restraint, his dark hair untouched by the breeze that worried at the edge of Beatrice's veil. He was taller than she had expected, not by theatrical excess, but by the kind of still authority that made space arrange itself around him. Lord Edmund gave a low bow. "Your Grace, allow me to present my niece, Lady Beatrice Lydgate. Circumstances have, as you know, required a small alteration, as though he had changed the flowers. As though Beatrice were a ribbon selected at the last moment because the preferred shade had run out." The Duke's eyes did not leave Beatrice. "I am aware of the alteration." His voice was low, controlled, and clear enough for those closest to hear. "I am less persuaded that it is small." The murmurs thinned. Lord Edmund's expression flickered. Beatrice placed her hand in the Duke's. His glove was cool. His hold was careful, neither possessive nor indifferent. He did not tug her forward. He waited until she chose to take the next step. That small courtesy nearly undid her. She had prepared herself for command, not consideration. She had prepared herself for a man embarrassed by her existence. The Duke turned with her toward the chapel doors, and only then did his gaze dip once more toward the pocket where the thimble lay hidden. "You brought it," he said softly. The words were so quiet that no one else could have heard them. Beatrice's heart gave one hard beat. "Brought what, Your Grace?" "Courage," he said. "Come. The room has already decided what it wishes to think of you. Let us disappoint it." Before she could answer, he led her inside. The chapel seemed to inhale. Every pew was full. White lilies lined the aisle, their fragrance almost too sweet, too celebratory for the morning's bitterness. Sunlight fell through tall windows and caught on jewels, polished buttons, and lifted faces. Beatrice felt every pair of eyes as a hand against her back. There sat Lady Drusilla, rigid with family pride and private fury. There sat Octavia, newly arrived and placed where all might see the beauty the Duke had not received. Her blue silk glowed in the candlelight. Her expression held sorrow so artfully that several people near her looked ready to comfort the wronged woman who had wronged everyone. Beatrice walked beside the Duke, not on his arm, but near enough to feel the steadiness of him. Halfway down the aisle, a gentleman whose name she did not know leaned toward his companion. Harrowden must be desperate indeed. The Duke stopped. It was not a dramatic halt. No flourish, no anger. He simply ceased moving, and because he ceased, the entire chapel seemed to cease with him. The gentleman went pale. Beatrice could feel Lord Edmund behind her, willing the moment to pass, willing the Duke not to make the insult larger by acknowledging it. The Duke turned his head, just enough. "You will repeat that, sir." The gentleman swallowed. "Your Grace, I meant no offense." "Then you'll find silence an excellent method of proving it." No one breathed. Beatrice stared at the flowers ahead and tried not to let the sudden heat in her eyes become visible. She did not want gratitude to rise in her. Gratitude was too close to surrender. Yet something inside her, tightened since dawn, loosened by a single notch. The Duke had not praised her. He had not pretended affection. He had not made a performance of outrage. He had merely placed his rank between her and open mockery, as naturally as another man might close a door against rain. They continued to the altar. The clergyman looked relieved when they arrived, though his eyes moved once toward Octavia and then away again. Even holy men, Beatrice thought, were not immune to gossip. Lord Edmund took his place with the air of a guardian, making a noble sacrifice. Lady Drusilla dabbed at dry eyes. Octavia looked at the Duke, waiting perhaps for regret to cross his face. It did not. His profile remained composed, almost severe, but when Beatrice's fingers tightened around the small prayer book placed in her hands, his voice came beside her, low enough to belong only to her. "Breathe, Duchess, Duchess." The word struck her more violently than substitute had. She was not yet accustomed to being named by a future, rather than a defect. The service began. Beatrice had attended weddings before. She knew the rhythm of them, the solemnity, the vows shaped by centuries of repetition, the rustle when guests leaned to see whether the bride trembled. Now she heard every word as if from underwater. "Wilt thou have this man, not the idea of him, not the rank, not the cold rumor of him." This living, unreadable stranger who had noticed a hidden thimble and silenced a chapel. Her voice, when required, emerged steadier than she felt. "I will." The words crossed the chapel and did not break. The Duke answered after her, his own vow calm and without hesitation. Beatrice had expected reluctance. She had feared insult dressed as duty. Instead, he spoke as though every person in the chapel existed at the edge of his awareness, and only the vow itself mattered. When the ring was placed in his hand, a faint disturbance passed through the front pew. Octavia had leaned forward. Beatrice saw it from the corner of her eye. A tiny movement. A claiming of attention. The Duke did not look at her. He took Beatrice's hand. For an instant, his thumb rested near the base of her finger, careful of the glove, careful of her. "With this ring," he said, and his voice did not change, yet the chapel listened harder. The gold slid into place. It was a little loose. Of course it was. It had not been measured for her. A whisper moved somewhere behind them. "It does not even fit." Beatrice's face warmed. The Duke's hand closed lightly over hers, hiding the ring from view. "It will be attended to," he said, not to the whisperer, but to the room. "As all matters concerning her Grace will be attended to. Her Grace." This time no one whispered. The clergyman continued, visibly relieved that thunder had passed without breaking the roof. Beatrice kept her gaze forward. Her heart beat too quickly beneath the borrowed silk. She could feel the Duke beside her, still and controlled but not untouched. There was a tension in him, not tenderness yet, not trust. Something sharper, recognition perhaps, a question held under lock. When the final blessing was spoken, the chapel seemed to wait for the bride to falter, for the groom to withdraw, for some visible sign that the marriage was an awkward bargain barely survived. Beatrice gave them none of it. She turned with the Duke. The aisle stretched before her, lined with faces that had expected shame to make her smaller. It did not. If anything, the weight of their looking steadied her. Octavia's eyes met hers. For one brief moment, Beatrice saw the truth under her cousin's delicate sorrow. Octavia was not grieving the Duke. She was grieving the loss of being the woman he might have wanted. The Duke offered his arm then, not with flourish, but with certainty. Beatrice placed her hand upon it. The repaired veil brushed her shoulder. The ring shifted under her glove. The thimble rested against her pocket like a secret heartbeat. They walked back down the aisle together. At the chapel doors, the guests began to stir behind them. eager for the wedding breakfast, hungrier still for interpretation. Lord Edmund was already approaching, smile restored, ready to reclaim the narrative before anyone else could shape it. "Your Grace," he said, "the family is honored beyond measure. Naturally, the morning's irregularities have been trying for us all." The Duke looked at him with such stillness that Lord Edmund faltered. "Irregularities are often revealing." "Indeed," Lord Edmund said quickly, "and Lady Beatrice has behaved with commendable gratitude." Beatrice felt the word land exactly where her uncle intended it. The Duke's arm remained steady beneath her fingers. "My wife has behaved with dignity. My wife, not the bride, not your niece, not the replacement, my wife." Lady Drusilla's mouth pressed thin. Octavia's fan stopped moving. Lord Edmund bowed again, too low, too late. "Of course." Outside, the carriage waited to take them to Harrowden House, where breakfast, speeches, and sharper knives, disguised as compliments, would follow. Beatrice thought that the ceremony had exhausted her capacity for surprise. Then the Duke leaned closer, his voice quiet enough to stir only the edge of her veil. "Endure the breakfast, Duchess. After that, you'll have the truth." Beatrice turned her face toward him. What truth? For the first time, something almost human moved through his eyes. Not warmth, not yet, a shadow of regret. "The one your family has spent years hoping you wouldn't find." By the time the carriage reached Harrowden House, Lady Beatrice had learned that a wedding could be survived one breath at a time, but a wedding breakfast required an entirely different species of courage. The ceremony had been public, solemn, and brief. The breakfast was intimate enough to be cruel. In the long dining room, beneath portraits of stern Vale ancestors, and chandeliers bright with winter sunlight, every guest seemed to have arranged a polite expression over an indecent curiosity. Silver gleamed, china chimed. White flowers stood in tall vases along the table, as if purity itself had been hired to disguise the morning. Beatrice sat beside Alistair Vale, Duke of Harrowden, in a chair that had surely been placed for Octavia. The cushion beneath her was too soft. The ring beneath her glove was too loose. Her new name, Duchess of Harrowden, hung in the air like a garment society expected her to trip over. Lord Edmund sat opposite her, his face composed into noble suffering. Lady Drusilla dabbed and once at her eyes whenever anyone looked in her direction. Octavia had been placed 2 seats away, close enough to be admired and far enough to appear wronged. She spoke little, which was unusual. Silence suited her when it made other people wonder what pain she was nobly bearing. Beatrice lifted her teacup and noticed that her hand did not shake. That felt like a private victory. The Duke noticed too. He did not smile. He merely moved the sugar bowl half an inch closer to her, as though he had seen she had been made to reach too often in life, and had decided, without announcement, that she would not reach now. The gesture was too small to be a performance. That made it more dangerous. Lord Edmund rose before the second course was cleared. A hush moved down the table with practiced eagerness. "Your Grace," he said, inclining his head toward the Duke, "and my dear niece, now her Grace, the Duchess of Harrowden." He paused long enough for the title to sound unnatural in his mouth. This morning has proved that Providence sometimes arranges blessings in unexpected forms. Though family disappointments may disturb the most careful plans, we are comforted to see that modesty, obedience, and gratitude can still preserve what beauty and spirit, alas, may imperil. A few guests lowered their eyes. One older lady's lips tightened, not with disapproval of Lord Edmund, but with pleasure at the sharpness of the cut. Beatrice felt the words settle around her. Modesty, obedience, gratitude. He had built a cage and called it a toast. Octavia's gaze dropped to her plate, but her mouth softened with satisfaction. The Duke set down his glass. The sound was quiet. It ended the room. Lord Edmund turned, surprised to find his speech interrupted by silence rather than applause. Alistair did not rise. He did not need to. "Lord Edmund," he said, "you have mistaken my dining room for a place where my wife's dignity may be measured against another woman's choices." Colour crept up Lord Edmund's neck. "Your Grace, I intended only to express the family's relief." Then you'll express it without suggesting her grace is a consolation. Her grace. Again, clear, unyielding. Beatrice kept her eyes on the table, because if she looked at him, she feared some piece of her carefully arranged composure would give way. Lord Edmund bowed slightly. Naturally. No offence was meant. Then none will be repeated. The guests became very interested in their plates. Lady Drusilla looked as if she had swallowed a pin. Octavia's fan opened with a soft snap. Beatrice finally turned toward her husband. His profile remained cold, almost severe. Yet there was a deliberate quality to his stillness. He was not merely defending rank. He was drawing a line and making everyone watch where it fell. "Thank you," she said under her breath. "Don't thank me for naming what is already yours," he replied, barely moving his mouth. The words unsettled her more than any compliment would have done. For the remainder of the breakfast, no one called her fortunate. No one called her substitute. No one dared say modesty as if it meant disappearance. That did not make the room kind, it only made it careful. Carefulness, Beatrice knew, was often the first form of fear. When the last guest departed and the door closed behind Lady Drusilla's stiff back and Octavia's wounded beauty, Harrowden House seemed to exhale. Beatrice stood in the entrance hall beneath a carved ceiling, high enough to make a woman feel very small if she allowed it. Lord Edmund lingered by the door, his gloves in hand. "A word with my niece, your grace." The Duke turned. No, the simplicity of it startled even Beatrice. Lord Edmund blinked. "I beg your pardon. You may write to her grace if family matters require attention. You may not corner her in my hall on the day of her marriage. She is my ward in all but name. She is my wife. In law and in name." Beatrice felt the room tilt, not because the statement was tender, but because it was absolute. Lord Edmund looked at her then, and in his eyes she saw something colder than anger. Calculation. "I trust you will remember your family, Beatrice." The Duke answered before she could. "I trust her to remember everything." Lord Edmund left with a bow that promised nothing good. The door shut. Beatrice's breath returned slowly. "You do not know what he meant by that. I know men who place warnings inside blessings." The Duke looked toward the staircase. "You were promised truth after breakfast. You shall have it tonight when this house is quiet enough for truth to be heard." The hours between that sentence and nightfall passed with an unreal precision. Beatrice was shown to a suite prepared in haste and luxury, where maids unpacked trunks that had never truly belonged to her. At 9 o'clock, a servant brought word that his grace awaited her in the small library. Not his bedchamber, not hers, a library. Beatrice understood the mercy of that choice before she understood anything else. She went without jewels, without the veil, in a plain ivory evening gown that had been altered at the shoulders, and still did not quite know her shape. The small library was warm with lamplight, and lined with books that seemed to have been read rather than displayed. The Duke stood near the desk. He had removed his gloves. On the polished surface before him lay 3 objects: a folded letter yellowed at the edges, a narrow packet tied with dark thread, and her silver thimble. Beatrice stopped in the doorway. Her hand went at once to her pocket. "Empty. How did you get that? You dropped it when you left the dining room." His voice was quiet. "I should have returned it sooner. I wanted you to see it here." "Why?" He gestured to the chair opposite the desk. He did not approach her. He did not command. He waited. Beatrice sat because her legs had begun to feel unreliable, and because fear was easier to face when seated upright. The Duke pushed the thimble gently toward her. 3 years ago, my younger sister Lavinia was traveling through Hampshire with a companion when one of the carriage traces broke near a village fair. It was not a grave accident, but it was inconvenient, visible, and close enough to scandal, because a gentleman not of our party assisted before proper help arrived. Beatrice frowned. A memory stirred. Rain on a lane, a torn glove, a frightened young woman who had not wanted her name spoken before the gathering crowd. "I remember a lady," she said slowly. She would not give her name, because she was Miss Lavinia Vale, and one careless paragraph in a scandal sheet could have followed her for years. His gaze held hers. You shielded her with your own cloak, sent for the innkeeper's wife, and mended her glove so no one would see how badly her hand trembled. You refused money. You refused introduction. You left before my man arrived. Beatrice looked down at the thimble. That was nothing. No, he said, and for the first time his voice changed, only slightly, enough. It was everything to her. The room grew very still. Is that why you married me? It is why I remembered you. It is not the whole reason I married you. He lifted the folded letter. After Lavinia told me the story, I asked questions. Quietly. Your mother's name appeared where it should not have appeared, in old correspondence with my family's solicitor. She had placed certain papers under Harrowden protection shortly before her death. Beatrice's fingers tightened around the thimble. My mother had no papers. My uncle told me everything was settled. Your uncle lied. The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Beatrice felt them enter her like cold water. The Duke continued with measured care. Your mother believed a portion of her marriage settlement and private funds had been diverted. She feared confronting Lord Edmund without protection would leave you vulnerable. She sent copies of certain accounts to our solicitor because my father had once been a friend to your father. Beatrice stared at the letter. All the rooms of her childhood seemed to shift at once. The locked drawers, the missing books, Lord Edmund's irritation whenever she spoke of her mother's things. Why was I never told? Because the papers vanished before the matter could be pursued. Your mother died, my father died, the following year. The trail went cold. Until today, until Octavia refused me, and Lord Edmund offered you in her place, faster than honor could explain. Beatrice looked up sharply. You think he wanted me gone from his house? I think he wanted you under a title grand enough to silence questions, yet bound to a husband cold enough that you would have no ally. His mouth tightened. He misjudged me. A faint, bitter laugh escaped her before she could stop it. Did he? You did not ask me before making me your duchess. The Duke accepted the blow without flinching. No. I did not. That honesty disarmed her more than denial would have done. Why? Because if I challenged him before the ceremony, he would have withdrawn you, destroyed what remained, and painted you as unstable before half of London. Marriage gave you a shield he could not easily remove. A shield, she repeated. Or another cage. He looked at her for a long moment. That depends on whether I am wise enough to hand you the key. The fire crackled softly. Somewhere beyond the door, the house settled into night. Beatrice touched the letter, but did not open it. Not yet. Once opened, the past would become real in a new and terrible way. You said in the chapel that I brought courage. You did. No, she whispered. I brought a thimble because it was the only thing of hers they left me. The Duke's expression shifted, and she saw regret there again, carefully contained but unmistakable. Then let it be the first thing returned to you. He stepped back from the desk, leaving the letter, the packet, and the thimble within her reach. Not in his hand, not under his control, hers. Beatrice looked at the objects until their edges blurred. All day she had been called substitute, blessing, wife, duchess. Now in the quiet of a stranger's library, she felt the first dangerous stirring of another name. Heiress, perhaps, wronged daughter, witness. Your Grace, she said, and her voice was steadier than her heart. What did my uncle steal from me? The Duke did not answer at once, and in the pause Lady Beatrice learned that some silences were not empty. They were rooms one had to cross before the floor gave way. Alistair stood on the opposite side of the small library desk, his hands clasped behind his back, his face as controlled as it had been in the chapel. Yet his eyes remained on the old letter, as if it were a thing that could wound the living. I do not yet know the full measure, he said. Your mother suspected that funds settled upon her at marriage, and meant eventually for you, had been redirected through accounts, controlled by Lord Edmund. She wrote of missing ledgers, altered receipts, and a private income that ceased without explanation after your father's death. Beatrice stared at the paper. The room seemed to narrow until there was only the letter, the thimble, and the man who had placed both within her reach. Money, she said, and disliked how small the word sounded beside years of obedience. Not merely money. His voice softened by a degree. Choice, security. The power to refuse dependence. That struck harder. Beatrice thought of all the times Lady Drusilla had called an old gown generosity. All the times Lord Edmund had told her she was fortunate to remain under his protection. All the times she had swallowed questions because a dependent woman with no account of her own was expected to be grateful for the chair in which she sat. She lifted the letter, then set it down again without breaking the seal. "I cannot read this here." Alistair inclined his head. "Then you shall not." She looked at him quickly. "You do not intend to insist. I intend to learn when my wife says no." The words were plain, and because they were plain, they entered more deeply than comfort would have done. Beatrice closed her hand around the thimble. "If Lord Edmund has hidden something, he will not leave it hidden now, not after today. No." Alistair's expression hardened. "Which is why we leave for Morland Chase tomorrow morning." A chill moved through her. "You are sending me away. I am taking you to a house where his servants cannot listen at the doors and his friends cannot shape every whisper before noon. That sounds very like sending me away with better horses." His eyes met hers. "Then I shall say it differently. I would like you to come with me to Hampshire, because the first trace of your mother's papers passed through my family's solicitor there. I will not force you." The answer should not have mattered so much. Yet Beatrice found herself breathing again. "And if I choose not to go, then I remain in London with you, and we face him here." No one had ever offered Beatrice a choice so calmly, without first arranging the correct answer for her. The strangeness of it nearly made her suspicious. "Morland Chase," she said, tasting the name. "Is it grand, inconveniently?" Against her will, her mouth almost curved. "That is a ducal answer. It is an honest one." He looked at the sealed packet, then back to her. "There is something else. My sister Lavinia is not at Morland Chase. She is with our aunt in Devon for her health. You need not face more family before you are ready. You speak as though I am made of glass." "No," he said. "I speak as though many people have mistaken endurance for permission." Beatrice lowered her gaze first. It was not surrender. It was self-preservation. "Very well. I will go to Morland Chase." Dawn brought no tenderness to London, only grey light over wet stone, and the rattle of wheels in the street below Harrowden House. Beatrice travelled in the Duke's carriage with a lady's maid she scarcely knew seated opposite until the outskirts, while Alistair rode part of the way and joined the carriage when the road turned rough. He did not crowd her with questions. He did not ask whether she had slept, perhaps because the answer was written plainly enough beneath her eyes. On the seat beside her lay a folded newspaper untouched. When the carriage stopped at an inn more than 60 miles from London, she saw two gentlemen in the yard glance toward the crest on the door and whisper. Alistair saw them too. When he entered the private parlour, he took the newspaper from a footman before it reached her hand. "Was that necessary?" Beatrice asked. "Yes, because it mentioned me, because it lied. Then I should see what shape the lie has taken." He stood very still, then placed the paper on the table between them. "You're right." Beatrice unfolded it. The paragraph was brief, poisonous, and elegantly phrased. It did not call her ambitious directly. It did not need to. It spoke of sudden substitutions, family distress, and a bride elevated by extraordinary good fortune. Her stomach tightened, but her voice remained steady. "They make gratitude sound like guilt." Alistair's jaw hardened. "No scandal sheet will be admitted at breakfast while you are at Morland Chase. That will not prevent them from being printed." "No. But it will prevent them from being served to you with tea." She should have found the severity absurd. Instead, she found it oddly careful. By late afternoon, the road opened into Hampshire. Countryside, green fields divided by hedgerows, bare trees holding the last of winter in their branches, and villages with church towers rising beyond low stone walls. Morland Chase appeared at the end of a long drive just as the sun thinned behind cloud. It was not merely grand. It was ancestral, grey and wide, with wings built by generations of men who had assumed the future would always make room for them. Beatrice looked at the house and felt, absurdly, like a misplaced button on a military coat. Inconvenient was generous, she said. Alistair glanced at her. I considered terrifying, but it seemed poor hospitality. She nearly smiled. The carriage stopped before the steps. Servants stood in formal lines, their faces composed with the violent neutrality of people who already knew too much. A woman in black silk came forward first, keys hanging at her waist, posture straight as a ruler. Your Grace, she said to Alistair, then turned to Beatrice with a curtsy exact enough to contain judgment without displaying it. Your Grace, I am Mrs. Valewood, housekeeper of Morland Chase. There it was again. Her Grace, not warm, not cruel. A title presented like a test. Beatrice stepped down before Alistair could offer his hand, then regretted the small defiance when the hem of the altered gown caught on the carriage step. She freed it quickly. Mrs. Valewood's eyes noticed. Alistair noticed the noticing. The Duchess has had a long journey, he said. She is to be obeyed in all matters concerning her comfort and her rooms, Mrs. Valewood curtsied again. Of course, Your Grace. Beatrice felt the servants listening. She also felt the danger of becoming a silent object in a house where every order about her passed through her husband. Thank you, she said, and turned to the housekeeper. I would prefer warm water, writing paper, and a tray in my sitting room if that is convenient. I should also like to know the names of the women attending me, Mrs. Valewood's expression changed almost imperceptibly. Not affection, assessment. Very good, Your Grace. Inside, Morland Chase smelled of beeswax, old stone, and wood smoke. Portraits watched from panelled walls. Somewhere above, a door closed too quickly, and Beatrice knew gossip had already outrun her up the stairs. She was shown to a suite overlooking the south lawn, where the bed hangings were blue. The fire was lit, and the dressing room had been prepared with haste disguised as perfection. At the far end of the corridor, she noticed a closed door darker than the others, its brass handle dull from disuse. What room is that? Mrs. Valewood's hand paused on her key ring. The late Duchess's morning room, Your Grace. His Grace's mother? Yes, Your Grace. Why is it locked? The housekeeper's face became a well-trained wall. It has not been used for many years. Alistair, who had entered quietly behind them, answered before Beatrice could press further. Because my father ordered it closed after her death, and I lacked the courage to open what he left untouched. Mrs. Valewood looked down. Beatrice turned toward him, startled less by the confession than by the fact that he had made it before a servant. His face remained composed, but there was something old in his eyes. Would you like it opened? He asked. The question passed through the room like light under a door. Mrs. Valewood watched Beatrice now, not the Duke. Beatrice understood the test had shifted. A selfish woman would seize the room because she could. A timid one would refuse because history frightened her. She was neither, though she was not yet certain what she was becoming. Not tonight, she said. A closed room deserves more respect than curiosity. Alistair's gaze held hers. As you wish. Later, when the tray had come and the servants had gone, he brought a narrow account book to her sitting room himself. This was found in the estate office after my father died. I had not understood its importance until your mother's letter was compared with the dates. Beatrice sat by the fire, the silver thimble on the table beside her tea. She had not meant to place it there. Her hand had done it without asking. Alistair opened the book and turned it toward her. The pages were filled with careful columns, names, numbers, and notations in faded ink. She leaned closer. Near the middle of the page, under the name of a Harrowden solicitor, stood a line that made her skin go cold. Countess Lydgate. Private papers received. Beatrice read it once, then again. Beneath it, in another hand, was a later notation, released to Lord Edmund Lydgate by family request. No, she whispered. My mother would never have requested that. I do not believe she did. Beatrice looked up. Outside, beyond the dark glass, Morland Chase lay quiet under the evening sky. but the quiet no longer felt empty. It felt full of locked rooms, old accounts, and footsteps approaching from the past. Before she could speak, a soft knock came at the door. Mrs. Vailwood entered with a silver tray. On it lay a calling card. Beatrice saw the name before the housekeeper announced it. Lady Octavia Lydgate. Mrs. Vailwood's voice remained calm, but her eyes were sharp. Her ladyship sends word that she intends to call tomorrow morning. Alistair's expression turned cold. Beatrice touched the edge of the account book, then the thimble, then lifted her chin. Then, tomorrow morning, she said, we shall receive her. Lady Octavia Lydgate arrived at Morland Chase the next morning, dressed as if she had been invited to forgive the house for preferring another woman. Her carriage rolled up the drive at 11, neither too early to appear vulgar, nor late enough to surrender advantage. Lady Drusilla sat beside her, upright beneath a bonnet trimmed with dark feathers, her expression arranged into maternal concern. From the south drawing-room window, Beatrice watched the carriage stop, and felt the strange calm that sometimes arrived when one had been insulted so often that surprise was no longer available. "You do not have to receive them," Alistair said from behind her. He stood near the mantel, already dressed for the morning in a dark coat, his face unreadable except for the hard line of his mouth. "A duchess may refuse any call she wishes." Beatrice looked at the calling card on the small table. Lady Octavia Lydgate. The engraved letters seemed to smile. "If I refuse, they will tell London I am hiding. Let them, you may afford indifference. I cannot." "Not yet." His eyes moved to her face, then to her hands, which were folded too tightly around her handkerchief. She released the cloth at once. "You believe receiving them is courage?" he asked. "No," she said. "I believe it is housekeeping." A faint shift passed through his expression, not quite amusement, but close enough to warm the room by 1 degree. "Then I shall remain." "No." The word came out before caution could soften it. Mrs. Vailwood, who stood near the door awaiting instruction, did not move, though Beatrice knew she had heard. Alistair did not look offended. He looked attentive, which was far more difficult to face. Beatrice drew a breath. "If you stand beside me, before they have spoken, Lady Drusilla will say, 'I cannot receive my own family without my husband's protection.' Let them discover first whether I need rescuing. And if they decide you do, then you may enjoy being correct." This time the change in his eyes was unmistakable, almost a smile. "I seldom enjoy it. How tragic for you." The footman announced Lady Octavia and Lady Drusilla before he could answer. Beatrice turned from the window and took the chair nearest the tea table. Not the largest chair, not the smallest, but the one from which she could see both the door and the hearth. The silver thimble was not with her. She had left it upstairs deliberately. Some things were too dear to bring into a room where Octavia might admire them falsely. The door opened. Octavia entered first in pale rose silk, soft as a flower and twice as practiced. Lady Drusilla followed, eyes moving quickly over the furniture, the portraits, the carpets, and finally Beatrice, as if calculating how much luxury had been wasted upon the wrong bride. "My dear Beatrice," Octavia said, coming forward with both hands extended. "Or must I say your grace now? How extraordinary it still feels." Beatrice stood. "In my husband's house, the servants will say your grace. My family may use my name if they remember kindness with it." Lady Drusilla's mouth thinned. "Marriage has improved your confidence. It has clarified my address." Octavia kissed the air near Beatrice's cheek and drew back with a delicate shiver. "You look pale." "I told Mamma the journey would be too much for you after such a trying ceremony. How brave you were standing there before everyone." There it was. The first needle, wrapped in ribbon. Beatrice motioned toward the chairs. "Please sit. Mrs. Vailwood has sent tea." Lady Drusilla sat as though granting the room permission to contain her. Octavia moved toward the chair nearest the hearth, then paused. It was a broad chair upholstered in dark blue, set slightly apart from the others. Beatrice had noticed it the previous evening. Mrs. Vailwood had called it the Duchess's chair without ceremony, as if furniture too understood hierarchy. Octavia rested one hand on its carved arm. How charming. Is this where the late Duchess sat? So I am told, Beatrice said. Octavia lowered herself into it before Beatrice could add anything. Then I shall borrow it for a moment. I always think one understands a house best by sitting where its women have sat. Mrs. Valewood's eyes flicked once to Beatrice. Lady Drusilla poured tea without asking, another small occupation of authority. We were anxious for you, of course, she said. No young woman should be thrust into such a position without guidance. Yet that is precisely what happened, Beatrice replied. Lady Drusilla set down the teapot with a faint click. You know very well what I mean. There are expectations now. A ducal household is not a place for country habits and sentimental attachments. You must learn quickly. Octavia glanced around the drawing room with bright curiosity. Has His Grace been kind? The question was soft. Too soft. Beatrice lifted her cup. Yes, how fortunate. Octavia leaned forward. He seems so severe. I confess I wondered whether he would be difficult in private. Beatrice held her gaze. Private matters are called private for a reason. A small silence followed. Lady Drusilla looked displeased. Octavia looked entertained. Forgive me. I only ask because all London is asking. It was such a sudden marriage. People cannot help wondering whether it is a marriage in truth, or merely in repair. Heat touched Beatrice's face, but she did not lower her cup. People can help a great many things when they are properly raised. Mrs. Valewood, still near the door, lowered her eyes quickly. Lady Drusilla's voice sharpened. Beatrice, yes, you would do well to remember that your cousin's withdrawal created a painful situation for us all. Octavia has suffered deeply. Octavia sighed beautifully. I don't wish to speak of myself. Then don't, Beatrice said. The room stilled. Lady Drusilla stared as if Beatrice had overturned the tea table. Octavia's face remained gentle, but her fingers tightened on the blue upholstery. You have changed. No. I have been addressed correctly for 24 hours. It has had an invigorating effect. Lady Drusilla leaned back. A title can be removed from affection very quickly, my dear. One hopes His Grace does not tire of novelty. One hopes many things, Beatrice said, including that guests remember whose roof shelters their remarks. Octavia laughed lightly, though no amusement reached her eyes. Listen to you. You sound almost as though you believe this was meant for you. Beatrice looked at her cousin, sitting in the Duchess's chair, rose silk, glowing against dark blue, her beauty arranged to make Beatrice appear plain by proximity. For years, Beatrice had stepped back from rooms so Octavia could be seen first. She had adjusted hems, found missing gloves, softened Lady Drusilla's criticisms, and listened to praise pour over her cousin like sunlight, while she stood in the useful shade. Yesterday, that shade had followed her to the altar. This morning, it had entered her drawing room and sat down. Beatrice placed her teacup on its saucer. My marriage is not a performance arranged for your comfort. Octavia's color changed. Lady Drusilla inhaled. The door opened before either could answer. Alistair entered without haste, but the room altered at once. It was remarkable how little a duke needed to do to remind everyone else of rank. He bowed to Lady Drusilla, then to Octavia, and finally looked at Beatrice, Duchess. The word was not affectionate. It was better than that. It was public. Your Grace, Lady Drusilla said quickly. We were just telling dear Beatrice how concerned we are for her adjustment. Were you? His gaze moved to Octavia. More precisely, to the chair in which Octavia sat. The silence changed shape. Octavia understood a heartbeat too late. She began to rise with a little laugh. I only borrowed it. Such a handsome chair. It belongs to my wife. No anger, no raised voice. Only fact, sharpened to a blade no one could politely name. Octavia stood fully. Of course, Mrs. Valewood, Alistair said. Her Grace's chair. The housekeeper stepped forward, not triumphant, not smiling, but exact. Octavia moved aside. Beatrice felt every eye turn to her. A lesser cruelty would have been easier. She could have refused the chair and appeared humble. She could have taken it too eagerly and appeared vain. Instead, she rose, walked to the blue chair, and sat as if she had always intended to do so at that exact moment. The room accepted the fact because the Duke had made refusal impossible. Lady Drusilla's nostrils flared. We never intended disrespect. Alistair looked at her. Then you will be relieved that it can be corrected so easily. Octavia's smile trembled. Beatrice knows I meant nothing by it. We've always shared everything. Beatrice rested her hands on the arms of the chair. No. You have often taken what was near me and called it sharing. The words left her quietly. They did not shake. That gave them weight. Lady Drusilla rose. This conversation has become unpleasant. It was unpleasant before I named it, Beatrice said. I only made it honest. For one brief instant, Lady Drusilla's composure cracked, and something like fear appeared beneath the irritation. Not fear of Beatrice's anger. Fear of what Beatrice might now remember she had the right to ask. Your mother, Lady Drusilla said, too quickly, filled your head with the same foolish pride. Always papers, always accounts, always insisting upon what was hers. Foolish papers do not make a woman safer, Beatrice. They make families suffer. Alistair went utterly still. Beatrice felt the words strike the hidden place opened in the library the night before. Your mother's foolish papers. She did not look at the Duke. She did not need to. What papers? She asked. Lady Drusilla's face closed. I misspoke. No, Beatrice said. You clarified. Octavia stepped in, voice bright with panic. Mamma is tired from travel. We should go. Yes, Lady Drusilla said. We have done our duty. Alistair moved toward the bell pull. Your carriage will be brought round. It was dismissal without the courtesy of disguise. Lady Drusilla curtsied stiffly. Octavia lingered 1 second longer, her gaze passing over Beatrice in the Duchess's chair, with a bitterness too vivid to hide. I hope Morland Chase brings you all you deserve, cousin. Beatrice met her eyes. For the first time, so do I. When the door closed behind them, the drawing room seemed larger, quieter. Beatrice remained seated, because standing too quickly would reveal that her knees were not as steady as her voice had been. Alistair approached only as far as the tea table. You did not need rescue, no. She looked toward the door, through which her aunt had fled, but you arrived at a useful moment. I heard enough. How much? Enough to know Lady Drusilla fears. Papers, she claims, are foolish. Beatrice touched the arm of the chair Octavia had tried to claim. A strange ache moved through her, not triumph, not relief, but the painful beginning of ownership. She would not have said it if she had not been frightened. Agreed. Then my mother's papers existed. Yes, Alistair's voice was low and certain. And someone in your family still knows why they mattered. Beatrice looked up at him. This time, gratitude did not feel like surrender. It felt like choosing not to stand alone when truth had finally entered the room. Then we find out who. By the next morning, the word papers had become more dangerous at Morland Chase than any open accusation. It appeared in Beatrice's thoughts while her maid pinned her hair. It waited behind Mrs. Valewood's careful questions about breakfast. It followed her into the estate office, where tall windows admitted a pale Hampshire light, over shelves of ledgers, receipt books, and correspondence tied in fading ribbon. Alistair had ordered nothing brought to her, as if she were a guest to be entertained. Instead, he had unlocked the office himself and placed the keys on the desk between them. You may see anything you wish, he said. Beatrice looked at the keys. They were heavy, iron, and plain. No jewel had ever tempted her half so much. Your steward will object. My steward will survive disappointment. And you? His gaze moved to her face. I am becoming acquainted with it. The answer was quiet enough to be dismissed as wit, but there was too much truth beneath it. Beatrice turned away first. On the desk lay the old account book opened to the page where her mother's name appeared beside the Harrowden solicitor. Countess Lydgate. Private papers received. Released to Lord Edmund Lydgate by family request. Those last words seemed to rearrange themselves each time she read them, forming new cruelties. Family request. Whose family? Whose consent? Whose right? I should like to see any letters connected with my mother, she said. Alistair reached toward a cabinet, then stopped. May I? It took Beatrice a second to understand that he was asking before touching the drawer. as though the possibility of her mother's name had given her authority over the wood itself. The courtesy unsettled her. Yes, he unlocked the cabinet and removed a narrow box. Some are dull, some may wound. You need not read them all today. If my mother was wounded while writing them, I can bear reading them. His expression changed, not in pity but in recognition. He placed the box before her. For an hour they worked in near silence. Beatrice read fragments rather than histories, a receipt from a solicitor in Winchester. A note from the late Duke's secretary acknowledging the arrival of sealed copies. A line in her mother's hand that made her pause until the ink blurred. I do not fear poverty for myself, but I fear dependence for my daughter, for it teaches a girl to thank the hand that empties her plate. Beatrice pressed her fingertips to the page. She felt Alistair watching her, but he said nothing. He had learned, at least in that moment, that some grief did not want witnesses to speak. A knock came at the door. Mrs. Vailwood entered with a curtsy and a folded list. Your Grace, the household linens sent for repair last quarter have been returned. The seamstress asks whether the new Duchess wishes to inspect them, as the late Duchess used to do. Beatrice looked up. The seamstress came here? Yes, Your Grace, Mrs. Miriam Sallows. A widow from East Hartham village. She is waiting in the servants' hall. Mrs. Vailwood hesitated. There was some question whether her work would continue under the new household economy. Beatrice heard the careful phrase beneath the words. Some economies began by dismissing women who had few defences. She closed the letter gently. Then I should like to see her work. Alistair stood. I will send for the steward. No, Beatrice said. Send for the linens. Mrs. Vailwood's eyes flickered with something almost approving. Very good, Your Grace. The linens were brought to a smaller morning room, overlooking the kitchen garden, and Mrs. Miriam Sallows followed them with a basket on one arm and nervous dignity in every line of her body. She was perhaps 40, with grey beginning at her temples, work-reddened hands, and a black gown carefully brushed to its best condition. She curtsied to Alistair first, then to Beatrice, then stared at the carpet, as if beauty in a great house might charge a fee for being noticed. Mrs. Sallows, Beatrice said. Mrs. Vailwood tells me you have repaired these for several years. Yes, Your Grace. The late Duchess favoured neat seams. Her ladyship said a household shows its breeding where guests don't think to look. Beatrice almost smiled. That sounds wise. She examined the first sheet. The hem had been turned so finely the repair almost vanished. Almost, Beatrice understood the discipline of invisible work. This is excellent. Mrs. Sallows looked startled. Thank you, Your Grace. I would like the arrangement continued. In fact, there are gowns and household pieces that may be altered. If you are willing, Morland Chase will have need of your needle. The widow's composure wavered. Your Grace is very kind. No, Beatrice said gently. You are very skilled. The distinction matters. Alistair, from near the window, turned his head slightly. He had heard, so had Mrs. Vailwood. The room held still for one breath, then Mrs. Sallows bent over her basket to hide her face. As she did, her gaze fell on Beatrice's hand. The silver thimble sat on her finger. She had put it on to examine the stitches and forgotten how visible it was. The widow went pale. Forgive me, Your Grace, she whispered. Where did you get that? Beatrice stilled. It was my mother's. Mrs. Sallows looked from the thimble to Beatrice's face, and something like memory opened in her eyes. Then you are her daughter. Alistair stepped closer, but stopped before he entered the circle between them. You knew Countess Lydgate, Mrs. Sallows swallowed. Not as a friend, Your Grace. I would not claim so much, but I saw her once. Here, years ago. She came in a plain travelling cloak, not in a grand carriage. She asked for the old Duchess, but His Grace's mother had already gone to Bath. The Countess waited in the west passage, and I was mending gloves by the laundry window. Beatrice's pulse quickened. Did she speak to you? Only to ask whether a lady might trust the house. I was young and foolish enough to answer honestly. I said Morland Chase kept secrets better than most houses, but not always happily. A shadow crossed Alistair's face. Beatrice barely noticed. What did she leave, Mrs. Sallows twisted her fingers in her apron. A packet, I think. It was wrapped in brown paper and tied with black thread. She carried a small prayer book too, blue leather, worn at the edges. She kept touching it as if it mattered more than the packet. Beatrice gripped the arm of the chair. The room sharpened around her. A prayer book? Yes, Your Grace. I remember because the clasp was broken, and she asked if I had a needle strong enough to pass through leather. I did not. She used a little silver thimble to force it through. That one, I think. Beatrice looked down. The engraved B had dulled with age, but the rim bore tiny scratches she had never understood. Not damage, work. Her mother had used it to hide something. Did she say where the prayer book went? Mrs. Sallows shook her head. No, Your Grace. But there was a maid with her later. A woman called Elspeth, Mrs. Elspeth Rowe, though she was Miss Carter then. She served your mother, I believe. She would know more. Where is she? Alistair asked. Bath, last I heard. She married a printer's clerk who died of fever. She took rooms near Walcott Street. Beatrice heard the name as if it had been written on a door opening before her. Elspeth Rowe, Bath, prayer book. Her mother's hands pressing a needle through leather, with the same thimble Beatrice wore now, Mrs. Sallows, Beatrice said, and her voice was steady only because it had to be. You have helped me more than you know. The widow curtsied, shaken. I hope I have not spoken out of place. No, Beatrice said. You have spoken exactly where truth needed to stand. After Mrs. Sallows had gone, Mrs. Valewood followed with the linens, leaving Beatrice and Alistair alone in the morning room. The silence between them was different from the library silence. This one had motion in it. Beatrice rose too quickly and pricked her finger on the needle still caught in the linen hem. A tiny bead of red appeared. Beatrice. Alistair was beside her at once, though not touching her. The use of her name struck her almost as sharply as the prick. He drew a clean handkerchief from his pocket. May I? She looked at his hand, then at his face. No command, no assumption. The moment was absurdly small, yet it seemed to contain every locked door between them. Yes. He wrapped the handkerchief lightly around her finger. His touch was careful, almost reverent in its restraint. I frightened you yesterday, he said, when I tried to decide how you should be safe. She watched his hands. Yes, I will likely do it again. Not because I mean to, because fear makes tyrants of men who imagine themselves protectors. She looked up then. The cold Duke of Harrowden stood before her with a widow's thread on his sleeve, her blood on his handkerchief, and honesty in his eyes. It was not tenderness, not yet, but it was a door unlatched. Then I will likely remind you, she said. No, she said. Probably not. His mouth almost softened. Before either could say more, Mrs. Valewood returned, this time without linens. In her hand was a folded newspaper, her expression grave. This arrived with the post, Your Grace. I thought His Grace should see it before breakfast. Alistair took it, opened it, and went still. Beatrice slipped the handkerchief from her finger. If it concerns me, I will read it. His eyes met hers. For a moment, his old instinct rose. She saw it. Then he placed the paper in her hands. The paragraph was short, elegant, and cruel enough to be admired by people who mistook malice for wit. The Duke's substitute bride. A marriage bought with a lie? Beatrice read it once. The words did not blur. They burned too clearly for that. At the bottom of the column, one sentence seemed written to reach across the miles and close around her throat. Sources close to the Lydgate family suggest the new duchess may have desired the arrangement long before propriety allowed it. Beatrice folded the paper with careful hands. Someone has begun before we did. Alistair's face had gone colder than she had ever seen it. Then we returned to London. Beatrice touched the thimble, feeling the scratched rim beneath her thumb. Yes, she said, but this time I will not arrive as a woman being delivered. I will arrive as one asking questions. London received the Duchess of Harrowden as it received all useful scandal, with closed doors, lifted curtains, and 1,000 polite mouths pretending not to hunger. By the time Beatrice's carriage turned into Mayfair, the column from the scandal sheet had already done its work. It had travelled faster than horses, faster than decency, faster even than truth could lace its boots. At Harrowden House, footmen stood straighter than usual, as if posture alone might defend their new mistress from gossip. Beatrice sat down without waiting for Alistair's hand, not because she wished to refuse him, but because London had first seen her delivered as a substitute bride, and it would not see her return as a burden carried by her husband. Alistair noticed. Of course he did. His eyes moved from her face to the street, where two ladies in a passing carriage turned their heads too slowly to be innocent. "We can refuse Lady Ashbourne's route," he said as they entered the house. Beatrice removed her gloves, finger by finger. "No, you have nothing to prove to people who have already chosen the lie they prefer. I have something to learn from them." His expression chilled. "From gossip? From who repeats it before they know whether I will answer?" He was silent for a moment. The hall behind them seemed to listen. "You're determined to stand in the center of it," he said. "I've spent years being made useful in corners. I think the center may survive me for one evening." Something moved in his eyes, reluctant and almost proud. "Then I will stand beside you." She looked up. "Beside me, Your Grace." "Not in front of me." His jaw tightened once, not in anger, but in the effort of obedience. "As you wish." The rout at Lady Ashbourne's townhouse began at 9, when the rooms were already crowded, and the air smelled of wax, perfume, and sharpened curiosity. It was not a ball, though music drifted from one end of the rooms. It was worse than a ball. There was no dancing to excuse silence, and no formal dinner to occupy hands. People stood in glittering clusters, speaking just softly enough to claim innocence if overheard. Beatrice entered on Alistair's arm in a gown of deep ivory, plain by Octavia's standards, but fitted to her own shape at last. The ring had been adjusted that afternoon. It no longer slipped. Neither did she. Lady Ashbourne, a widow with silver hair and an appetite for fashionable danger, greeted them near the door. "Your Grace, Duchess. How brave of you to come. How generous of you to provide a room where bravery may be observed," Beatrice replied. Lady Ashbourne blinked, then smiled as if she had discovered a new flavor of amusement. "I hope you will find friends here. I hope to find honest enemies. They are less tiring." Alistair's hand rested lightly over hers, not warning, recognition. Across the room, Lord Edmund stood near the mantel, with the manner of a grieving guardian, and the complexion of a man who had slept well after poisoning a well. Lady Drusilla sat nearby, speaking into another lady's ear with an expression of sorrowful reluctance. Octavia stood beneath a gilt mirror in pale green silk, beautiful enough to make pity appear reasonable. When she saw Beatrice, her face softened into an expression that might have fooled anyone who had not grown up, watching her practice tenderness before glass. "Beatrice," Octavia said, crossing the room. "You came, I was invited, of course. I only meant, after that dreadful paragraph, I feared you might prefer quiet. I have had enough quiet." Octavia's smile fluttered. "Then perhaps society will be kind." Beatrice looked around the room. Fans paused. Heads tilted. Conversations thinned as if the air had been pulled tight. Society is rarely kind. It is occasionally well managed. Octavia laughed lightly, but her eyes hardened. "How ducal you sound already." "No," Beatrice said. "Only less available." Before Octavia could answer, Lord Edmund approached with paternal gravity so perfectly arranged that Beatrice nearly admired the workmanship. "My dear child," he said, lowering, his voice enough to invite everyone nearby to listen harder. "I had hoped you would spare yourself this strain." "Had you?" "There are whispers one cannot silence by walking toward them." Alistair's arm grew still beneath her hand. Beatrice felt his instinct rise like a door being barred. She pressed her fingers lightly against his sleeve. "Wait." Lord Edmund's gaze flicked to the gesture and sharpened. "You were always sensitive, even as a girl. Given to imagining slights where guidance was intended. And yet tonight, uncle, I have no need to imagine them." A murmur slipped through the nearest cluster. Lady Drusilla's fan opened. Octavia moved closer to Lord Edmund, a picture of family concern. "Please don't quarrel," she whispered. "Everyone is watching." "Yes," Beatrice said, That appears to be the point. The first true blow came not from Lord Edmund, but from a young matron in blue satin who had once praised Octavia's complexion for 12 uninterrupted minutes at dinner. She drifted forward, holding a folded paper. "Forgive me, Duchess. I would not mention it, only there is such confusion, and one hates confusion where a lady's reputation is concerned." Alistair looked at the paper. The temperature of the room seemed to drop. "What is that?" the matron faltered. "Only a letter shown to me by a person of complete respectability." Lord Edmund sighed. "This is most unfortunate." Beatrice turned to him. "You have seen it." "I had hoped it would not be necessary." Necessary. The word opened beneath the room like a trap. Octavia lowered her lashes. Lady Drusilla whispered, "Edmund, must we?" He took the paper from the matron with the weary sorrow of a man forced into nobility against his will. "I would not wound my niece for the world. But if false impressions have taken root, perhaps the truth must be allowed to correct them." Alistair's voice cut cleanly through the hush. "You will choose your next words with care." Lord Edmund bowed. "Always, Your Grace." He unfolded the paper. This letter, written in Lady Beatrice's own hand before the wedding, suggests that she was not as surprised by the substitution as many believed. Indeed, she appears to have desired it. The room went silent. Beatrice heard the fire crack. She heard a fan close. She heard her own heart, hard and steady. Lord Edmund began to read. "My dear uncle, if Lady Octavia remains uncertain, I beg you to consider whether His Grace might be better served by a bride more grateful for the honor. I have long understood the advantage such a match would bring, and if fortune should open the door, I would not be foolish enough to refuse it." The words passed into the room and changed shape as they traveled. They became ambition, scheme, hunger, a poor relation reaching for a coronet before propriety allowed. Beatrice felt the old wound open, not because the letter was convincing, but because the room wanted it to be. Someone whispered, "How dreadful!" Someone else breathed, "So she planned it." Octavia's face had gone pale with performed hurt. Lady Drusilla dabbed beneath one eye. Lord Edmund folded the letter slowly. "I tried to protect you, Beatrice. I tried to protect us all." Alistair moved half a step forward. Beatrice tightened her hold on his sleeve, not in front. His gaze dropped to her hand. The effort it cost him to stop was visible, only because she stood close enough to feel it. Beatrice released him and held out her hand. "May I see the letter?" Lord Edmund hesitated. "This is painful enough. Then let us be efficient." Lady Ashbourne made a soft sound that might have been admiration. Lord Edmund handed it over, because refusing would have looked like fear. Beatrice unfolded the paper. The handwriting did resemble hers, not perfectly. Enough for those who needed permission to believe. The loops were careful, the slant familiar, the restraint almost convincing, almost. She read the passage again, then looked at the top of the page. "My dear uncle," a cold clarity entered her. She did not smile. That would have been too easy to despise. "This is not mine." Lord Edmund's brows rose with sorrowful patience. A natural denial. "No. A simple fact." Octavia stepped forward. "Beatrice, don't make this worse." Beatrice looked at her cousin. "For whom?" The question struck harder than accusation. Octavia's lips parted, then closed. Beatrice lifted the letter slightly. "As a girl, I never called Lord Edmund my dear uncle in writing. My mother taught me that affection did not belong where trust had not been earned." Lady Drusilla stiffened. Beatrice continued, her voice steady enough to carry. "When I wrote formally, I addressed him as Sir. When I wrote within the household, I addressed him as Uncle Edmund. Never this." Lord Edmund's face did not change, but his eyes did. "Memory is a fragile defense, indeed, which is why forgeries often fail, where memory has been trained by neglect." A stir moved through the room. Alistair stepped beside her now, exactly beside her, not before. His voice was low, and every person heard it. "The Duchess has identified the letter as false." Lord Edmund gave a pained laugh. "A husband's loyalty is admirable." "This is not loyalty," Alistair said. "It is warning. Any person who repeats this accusation as truth will no longer be received at Harrowden House. That landed with the force of social ruin. fans stopped. Men who had leaned close to hear now straightened as if distance could save them. Beatrice still held the forged letter. The paper felt thin. The cruelty behind it did not. She turned it once in her hand and saw another mistake, smaller than the first. At the bottom, before the signature, was a phrase she had not heard in years: "Your obedient B. B." The childhood name her mother had used only in private. The name Lady Drusilla had mocked as childish, and Octavia had repeated once, until Beatrice stopped answering to it. Beatrice looked at Octavia. Her cousin looked away too quickly. There it was. Not proof. A thread. And Beatrice had spent her life mending torn things by following threads other people missed. She folded the letter with care. "I will keep this." Lord Edmund reached for it. "It is family property." Alistair's hand came down over the back of the chair beside him, not touching Lord Edmund, but stopping him all the same. "It is evidence of an insult offered to my wife." The word wife passed through the room like a door closing. Lord Edmund withdrew his hand. "You cannot silence every question, Your Grace." Beatrice met her uncle's eyes. "No, but I can begin asking my own." For the first time that evening, Lord Edmund looked afraid. It lasted less than a second. It was enough. The rout recovered around them in pieces, but the pleasure had gone out of the gossip. Beatrice had not been cleared, not yet. But she had refused the role written for her, and that refusal changed the air. When she and Alistair left, Lady Ashbourne curtsied lower to Beatrice than she had upon arrival. Outside, the carriage waited beneath a cold London sky. The door closed behind them, shutting out the last murmur from the street. Alistair sat opposite her, his face pale with controlled anger. "You are not to pursue this further." Beatrice looked down at the folded letter in her lap, at the false curves of her borrowed hand, at the name B placed there by someone who remembered what they should not have known. Then she looked at her husband. "I am afraid you married the wrong woman, if you expected obedience." The carriage had not travelled 500 yards before the silence inside it became another room with locked doors. Beatrice sat with the forged letter folded in her lap, her gloved fingers resting upon the false signature, as though pressure alone might force the paper to confess. Across from her, Alistair Vale looked out at the darkened London street, but his reflection in the glass betrayed the severity of his face. He had ordered her not to pursue the matter further. She had answered him as honestly as pride allowed. Now both truths sat between them, as sharp as knives no one intended to use, and yet no one could ignore. "You think obedience would keep me safe," she said at last. "I think your uncle has crossed from insult into strategy. He crossed that line years ago. He is only less careful now." Alistair turned from the window. "That is precisely why you must not give him another stage. He gave himself one tonight. I merely refused to play the part assigned to me, and for that he will punish you." The words were too blunt to be called fear, but fear lived beneath them. Beatrice heard it. She wished she did not. "Then I should learn where he means to strike." "No, you should leave London." She looked at him steadily. "There it is. Morland Chase is secure. My servants are loyal. My steward can send for the solicitor. We can examine the accounts without every gossip in Mayfair pretending concern at your elbow. And by tomorrow afternoon every drawing room will say the Duke has hidden his bride away because the forged letter was true." His jaw tightened. "Let them speak. You say that because their words do not make you smaller." He went still. The carriage lamps shifted over his face as they passed beneath a streetlight. For a moment, he looked less like the cold Duke and more like a man struck in a place he had not guarded. "You believe I do not know what words can do. I believe you have always had rank enough to answer them." She lifted the letter. "I have had to survive them." The carriage slowed before Harrowden House. Footman opened the door, and the night air entered cold and damp. Alistair stepped down first, then offered his hand. Beatrice hesitated only once before taking it. His fingers closed around hers with careful restraint, as if even his anger remembered not to grip. Inside, the hall blazed with lamps. Mrs. Grafton, the London housekeeper, waited with a tray. Her expression was properly blank, which meant the household had already sensed trouble. "A message arrived for her grace while you were out," she said. Alistair reached for it. Beatrice reached faster. The seal bore the Lydgate crest. "It is addressed to me." He withdrew his hand at once, but not easily. Beatrice broke the seal under the hall lamp. The note was in Lord Edmund's hand, elegant and familiar enough to turn her stomach. "My dear niece, rashness has already placed you in a painful light. For your own peace, return to Hampshire and allow wiser heads to restore what can yet be preserved. Should you continue to encourage inquiry, I shall be forced, with reluctance, to explain to society how grief and sudden elevation have unsettled you. Gratitude would still serve you better than defiance." The final line had been pressed so hard, the ink nearly cut the paper. Alistair read it over her shoulder. The air around him changed. "He threatens to call me unstable," Beatrice said. Her voice sounded calm, though the word had entered her like ice. "Ungrateful too, but that is an old hymn. This ends tonight. How? By removing you from his reach." "You mean from London?" "Yes. No." The answer passed through the hall with enough force that Mrs. Grafton lowered her eyes and withdrew without being told. Alistair waited until the servants were gone. "Beatrice, do not say my name as if it is a door you can close gently. I am trying to protect you. You are trying to move me. Because he will. Ruin you if he can. He has been ruining me in smaller rooms for half my life." Her voice did not rise. That made it worse. "I will not help him do it politely." Alistair stared at her, the note in his hand, the forged letter in hers. His face was controlled, but the control no longer looked cold. It looked costly. "What would you have me do?" he asked. The question should have comforted her. Instead, it arrived too late, after the command, after the instinct, after the old assumption that safety could be arranged around her, without asking where she wished to stand. "I would have you remember that a wife is not luggage," she said, "even when the road is dangerous." He closed his eyes for one brief second. When he opened them, the Duke had returned, precise and formidable. "Very well, you will remain in London for now, but there will be rules." Beatrice almost laughed. It would have sounded too close to despair. "Of course there will." By morning, the rules had taken physical form. No caller was admitted without approval. No note reached Beatrice before passing through the Duke's secretary. No newspaper appeared beside her breakfast plate. 2 footmen remained near the front door, as if Harrowden House had become an embassy under siege. Alistair did not announce these changes with arrogance. That almost made them worse. He enacted them with such quiet efficiency that Beatrice understood how easily a woman might be imprisoned by concern, and praised for being cherished. At breakfast she found only toast, tea, and a small bowl of preserves where scandal sheets might have lain. "Am I permitted marmalade?" she asked. "Or does it require inspection?" Alistair looked up from a letter. "That is unfair. Is it inaccurate?" "No correspondence will be withheld from you, only delayed until wiser eyes have examined it." He set the letter down. "Your uncle threatened to declare you unstable before society. And your answer is to control who may speak to me. My answer is to prevent his poison from entering this house. This house is not my mind." He flinched almost invisibly. Before he could reply, a footman entered with a card. Alistair took it, read, and placed it face down. Beatrice held out her hand. After a pause, he gave it to her. Lady Ashbourne had called. Beneath the name, in neat pencil, a note had been added. "Several ladies ask whether your grace receives, or whether the Duke prefers quiet for you." Beatrice read the sentence twice. There it was, already dressed in concern. Hidden bride, managed bride, wife too delicate to answer. Octavia's work had the scent of violets and venom. "She is telling them you have hidden me," Beatrice said. "Octavia? Who else would make pity sound like perfume?" Alistair rose and crossed to the window. "I will send a response." "No." "I will. Beatrice, if every answer comes in your hand, the rumor becomes true even while we deny it." He turned back. "And if I let every snake through the door, then I shall learn which ones bite. That is not courage. It is exposure. It is society." He looked at her then with something like helpless anger. "You speak as if I want you silent." "No," she said, and because it was true her voice softened. "You speak as if my silence would be a fair price for my safety." A knock came before he could answer. His secretary entered, pale with discomfort, holding a sealed packet. "Your Grace, Lord Edmund Lydgate's man waits below. He says it concerns an immediate family settlement." Beatrice stood. The word settlement moved through her, like a bell struck in a closed room. Alistair's expression became unreadable. Too unreadable. "In the study," he said. "I will receive it." "We will receive it," Beatrice said. His eyes met hers. No, the refusal was quiet, but absolute. He seemed to hear himself at the same moment she did. Something passed between them, sharp and wounded. "You asked what I would have you do," she said. "This is where you begin. This is where I keep him from baiting you. No. This is where you decide whether I am wife or rescued woman." The secretary looked as if he would rather disappear into the carpet. Alistair did not move. "The study," he repeated. Not to Beatrice, but to the man. "I will come at once." The secretary bowed and withdrew. Beatrice stood alone with her husband in the breakfast room, with the tea cooling between them and the whole shape of their marriage suddenly visible. He could defend her against a room. He could silence a whisper. He could make servants obey and relatives retreat. But when truth approached wrapped in danger, his first instinct was still to stand between her and the door. "You promised me a key," she said. "Do you remember?" His face changed. "Yes." "Then do not keep it in your pocket." She left before he could answer, not because she had won, but because staying would reveal that her hands were shaking. In her sitting room, she closed the door and took out the silver thimble. For a moment, she pressed it to her palm until the engraved letter marked her skin. Then she crossed to the desk and drew a sheet of paper toward her. Mrs. Sallows had spoken of a maid in Bath, Mrs. Elspeth Rowe, once Carter. A woman who might know where her mother's prayer book had gone. Beatrice wrote the name carefully, then composed a note in a hand no one could mistake, because she refused to write like a frightened woman. "Mrs. Elspeth Rowe, if this reaches you, I am the daughter of the Countess Lydgate. I believe you once served my mother. I believe you may know what she tried to save for me." By the time Alistair came to the door an hour later, Beatrice had already sealed the note and placed it beside her calling card. He saw it at once. His eyes moved from the letter to her face. "What have you done?" "I have asked a question." "To whom?" "Someone my uncle did not think to frighten in time. You cannot chase witnesses through England while he is waiting to destroy your reputation." Beatrice lifted her chin. "Then I shall not chase. I shall call properly with a chaperone and a footman, like any respectable duchess paying a visit." His fear flashed again, almost anger in its brightness. "You are determined to make safety impossible." "No," she said. "I am determined not to confuse safety with disappearance." He stood there, magnificent and miserable, a man built to command armies of servants and silence whole rooms, defeated for the moment by a wife who would not be placed where he wanted her. Beatrice touched the sealed note. "Do not make my safety another room in which I am not allowed to speak." The words left him silent. This time she did not fill that silence for him. The reply from Mrs. Elspeth Rowe arrived before dawn, delivered by a printer's apprentice, with ink beneath his fingernails and terror in his eyes. Beatrice was awake when the footman brought it, fully dressed in a dark travelling gown, as if some part of her had known the past, would not wait for a civilized hour. The note contained only one line beyond the address. "If you are truly her daughter, come before your uncle remembers me." No threat Lord Edmund had sent chilled Beatrice as deeply as that plea. It did not sound like gossip. It sounded like a door closing. By 7, Mrs. Valewood stood in the hall with her bonnet tied, her keys left in Mrs. Grafton's keeping, and her face arranged into the grim calm of a woman who had decided that propriety was best defended by precision. "The carriage is marked with His Grace's crest," she said. "A footman will ride behind. We shall stop only where necessary. Anyone who asks will be told, 'Your Grace is paying a call upon an elderly acquaintance in Bath.'" Beatrice drew on her gloves. You disapprove. I disapprove of secrets that force a duchess to travel before breakfast. Mrs. Vailwood looked toward the staircase. I also disapprove of leaving His Grace uninformed. Beatrice's hand paused at the second glove button. Alistair had been in the study past midnight, with his secretary and Lord Edmund's proposed settlement, and Beatrice had not been summoned. That omission had done what argument could not. It had shown her the shape of the protection he preferred when fear guided him. His Grace would stop me. Yes. Then he may disapprove upon my return, Mrs. Vailwood studied her for one long moment. Your mother must have had uncommon courage. The words entered quietly. Beatrice looked away before gratitude became too visible. I am trying to discover whether I inherited any of it. The journey to Bath took them more than 100 miles through grey morning, rutted roads, and villages that appeared and vanished like witnesses unwilling to be named. Beatrice sat beside Mrs. Vailwood, with the silver thimble in her reticule and the forged letter tucked against her stays, each object a different kind of accusation. The footman rode behind them. The curtains were kept partly drawn. Nothing about the journey was improper, and yet every mile felt like defiance. At an inn near Reading, Mrs. Vailwood brought tea into a private parlour and said nothing when Beatrice could not drink it. Outside, a gentleman glanced twice at the crest on the carriage. Beatrice lifted her chin until he looked away. She was tired of being hidden by other people's fears. By late afternoon, Bath rose around them in pale stone terraces and respectable windows, the city elegant enough to make desperation look indecent. Walcott Street was less grand, full of tradesmen, lodgings, carts, and the steady movement of people who could not afford to make sorrow graceful, Mrs. Rowe lived above a small print shop, in a room reached by a narrow staircase that smelled of paper, dust, and boiled tea. The footman remained below, Mrs. Vailwood entered first, then stepped aside when an older woman opened the door. Elspeth Rowe was thin, grey-haired, and dressed in black so worn at the cuffs that Beatrice felt an immediate tenderness for her, yet her eyes were sharp. They went first to Beatrice's face, then to her hands. You have her look about the mouth, Mrs. Rowe said. Not her colouring, her resolve. Beatrice curtsied slightly, not as a duchess to a servant, but as one woman approaching another across years of silence. Mrs. Rowe, I'm Beatrice. I was told you served my mother. The woman flinched at the name, then opened the door wider. Then come in before someone earns a coin by watching. The room was plain, but orderly. A kettle sat near the small fire. Sheets of printed paper hung from a line in one corner. Mrs. Rowe did not offer needless comfort. She looked at Mrs. Vailwood, received the housekeeper's silent nod of respectability, and turned back to Beatrice. I have expected this for years and hoped it would never come. Why? Beatrice asked. Because your mother feared Lord Edmund more than she feared death. The words struck without ornament. Beatrice sat because Mrs. Vailwood's hand touched the back of the chair, not pushing, only reminding her it existed. Tell me, Mrs. Rowe folded her hands. Your mother believed money settled, for you had been moved under your uncle's control after your father died. She had copies made, not all, but enough to begin. She carried a packet to Morland Chase, thinking the late Duke's solicitor might protect it. But she feared papers could be stolen, so she hid the one thing that named the full account. Where, Mrs. Rowe's gaze dropped to Beatrice's reticule, as if she could sense the thimble inside. In a blue leather prayer book, the binding was slit and stitched again. She used a silver thimble to force the needle through because the leather was thick. Beatrice opened the reticule and placed the thimble on the table. Mrs. Rowe covered her mouth. For a moment the years seemed to leave her standing in another room with another woman. Yes, she whispered, that is it. Beatrice's voice became very quiet. Where is the prayer book now, Mrs. Rowe looked toward the window, though the curtain was drawn. It was returned to Lydgate House after your mother died. I packed it myself with her devotional books. Lady Drusilla took the box. She said sentimental objects would upset you. Beatrice closed her eyes. Sentimental objects. Her mother's voice, her mother's warning. Hidden under piety and locked in some drawer while Beatrice was taught to be thankful for cast-off gowns. Does Lady Drusilla know what is inside? I do not think she knew then. But if she has handled it since, she may have wondered. There was a ribbon around it, dark blue. Your mother tied it 3 times, always 3, because she said a careless person unties 1 knot, an impatient person cuts 2, but a guilty person tears the book apart. Mrs. Valewood murmured. Clever woman. Frightened woman, Mrs. Rowe said. Clever because she had to be. Beatrice took the thimble back and held it until the rim pressed into her skin. Why did you not write to me? Pain crossed Mrs. Rowe's face. I tried once when you were 15. The letter was returned unopened. After that, a man came to my rooms and said, if I valued my husband's position, I would leave the past buried. My husband was ill. We had no savings. I was afraid. Shame and pleading stood together in her voice. Beatrice could not punish fear in a woman who had owned so little protection. You answered me now. Because you are a duchess now, Mrs. Rowe said, and because the same man came again yesterday. The room changed. Mrs. Valewood stepped closer to the door. Beatrice went still. Lord Edmund, one of his men, he asked whether any old Lydgate servant had been speaking. He did not name you. He did not need to. Beatrice looked down at the table. The truth had begun to move, and Lord Edmund had felt it. That meant the prayer book mattered. It also meant time had narrowed. Mrs. Rowe, would you swear to what you have told me before witnesses? The woman's hands trembled once. Then she folded them harder. For your mother, yes. For you, yes. But don't ask me to stand alone. I won't, Beatrice said. The promise surprised her with its certainty. I know what that costs. A sound came from below, a sharp exchange of voices, then hurried footsteps on the stair. Mrs. Valewood moved at once, but the door opened before she reached it. Alistair stood there, travel dust on his coat, and fear stripped bare from his face before anger could cover it. He looked first at Beatrice. Only when he saw her safe did the Duke return to his posture. Thank God. Beatrice rose. Your Grace. Do not, he said, then stopped because Mrs. Rowe and Mrs. Valewood were watching. He bowed to them with automatic courtesy, though his eyes returned to his wife. I received your note after you had been gone 2 hours. Then your secretary delayed it less than I feared. This is not a jest. No, it is a witness. She turned to Mrs. Rowe. This lady served my mother. She knows of the prayer book. Alistair's face shifted. The fear did not vanish, but purpose entered it. Where is it? Beatrice answered before Mrs. Rowe could. Lady Drusilla took it. It may still be among my mother's things. Then we returned to London at once. We? He held her gaze. Yes. We. The word did not erase the hurt between them, but it altered the road ahead, Mrs. Rowe gave Beatrice the direction of a former Lydgate undermaid, who might know where Lady Drusilla stored old boxes, then pressed one thin hand over Beatrice's. Your mother wanted you free, my lady. Not rich, free, Beatrice could not answer. In the carriage an hour later, twilight gathering over Bath behind them, Alistair sat across from her, with his hands clasped so tightly, the knuckles showed pale beneath his skin. You should not have come without telling me. You would have stopped me. Yes, that is why I came. Pain moved across his face. Do you understand what he could have done to your name if this had been seen wrongly? Yes, I understand reputation. I have lived under its boot, not above it. I am afraid for you, he said, and the confession came out rougher than any command. Every time you step toward him, I see the room closing around you. Beatrice looked through the window at the darkening road. I went because you would have saved my name and buried my truth. Silence followed, not empty, not finished. After a long moment, Alistair said, Then teach me how to do the first without committing the second. Beatrice turned back to him. The cold Duke looked very tired. He also looked, for the first time, willing to be wrong. Before she could answer, the carriage slowed. A rider approached from the opposite direction, carrying Harrowden colours. The footman brought the message to the window. Alistair broke the seal and read. His expression hardened into ice. Lady Drusilla has left London, he said. Beatrice's heart tightened. For where, no one knows. But she took a small trunk from Lydgate House. It was marked as belonging to your mother. By midnight, the road from Bath to London had become less a journey than a race against hands already reaching for the past. Beatrice sat rigid in the carriage, while the lamps swung against the dark, the message about Lady Drusilla folded on Alistair's knee. Neither of them slept. Mrs. Vailwood dozed in brief, disciplined intervals, waking whenever the wheels struck a rut. But Beatrice could not close her eyes without seeing a small trunk carried from Lydgate House, her mother's name hidden under dust, and a blue leather prayer book with a slit in its binding. Alistair sent riders ahead at every posting stop. By dawn, he had learned that Lady Drusilla had not gone far. She had taken rooms at a respectable house near Kensington, under the pretense of visiting an ailing friend. Respectable, Beatrice had learned, was often where guilty people hid when they wished to avoid the appearance of hiding. They reached the house before 10. Alistair insisted Beatrice wait in the carriage. She refused before he finished the sentence. "No," she said, fastening her glove. "If my mother's trunk is in that house, I shall not sit outside like a parcel." His face tightened. "I am asking for caution. You are asking for absence, Mrs." Vailwood cleared her throat in the smallest possible way, which somehow made the silence sharper. Alistair looked at Beatrice for one hard moment, then opened the carriage door himself. "Then remain beside me. That," she said, stepping down, "is all I have been asking." Lady Drusilla received them in a parlour heavy with rose wallpaper and false surprise. She wore a dark morning gown, and the lace at her cuffs trembled once before she folded her hands. "Your Grace," she said to Alistair, then turned to Beatrice with a smile too thin to cover fear. "My dear, what a dramatic hour for a family call." "Where is my mother's trunk?" Beatrice asked. Lady Drusilla's smile vanished. "I beg your pardon? No, you do not." "Where is it?" Alistair stood slightly behind Beatrice, close enough that she felt his presence like a wall, not in front of her, but at her back. Lady Drusilla looked past her to him. "Surely you will not allow this tone." "I am listening with interest," he said. That unsettled her more than anger would have done. The trunk was found in an upstairs dressing room after 10 minutes of denials, and one quiet order from the Duke to the landlady. Beatrice opened it herself. Inside lay a shawl, 2 cracked ivory combs, a bundle of letters tied with faded thread, a miniature portrait of her father, and 3 devotional books. No blue leather prayer book. No ribbon tied 3 times, no hidden packet. Beatrice searched again with hands that remained steady, only because despair had not yet been granted permission to enter. "It was here," Lady Drusilla said from the doorway. "If the book you imagine existed is missing, perhaps your mother disposed of it." Beatrice lifted her head. "You knew it was a book." Lady Drusilla's face froze. Alistair stepped forward 1 inch. "Careful, Lady Drusilla. This is monstrous," she said, recovering too quickly. "To invade a family room, to accuse me over some old prayer book, to upset poor Octavia again after all she has endured." The name struck Beatrice with sudden clarity. Octavia, who collected keepsakes that proved she had been adored. Octavia, who had taken ribbons, gloves, brooches, compliments, rooms, attention. Octavia, who would not have seen a blue leather prayer book as evidence, only as another relic to possess if it had once belonged to Beatrice's mother. Beatrice closed the trunk. "Did Octavia take it?" Lady Drusilla said nothing. It was answer enough. Back at Harrowden House, the absence of the prayer book filled every room. Alistair sent inquiries. His solicitor, Mr. Fenwick, arrived by afternoon with a narrow face, careful manners, and the look of a man who preferred documents to emotion. Beatrice was not invited to the first meeting. She discovered it because Mrs. Grafton, loyal to the Duke, but increasingly loyal to the duchesses, right to know when doors were being closed, mentioned that tea had been sent to the library for his grace, Mr. Fenwick and Lord Edmund Lydgate, Lord Edmund, in her husband's library. Beatrice walked there without haste. The door was not fully closed. Perhaps that was chance. Perhaps Alistair had not yet learned that secrecy had a sound, and Beatrice had been trained to hear it. Lord Edmund's voice reached her first, smooth and sorrowful. A public quarrel benefits no one. My niece is young, overwhelmed and unused to consequence. I am prepared, for the sake of peace, to restore a reasonable portion of what her mother believed due. In return, all insinuations cease. No accusation, no scandal, no dragging Lady Beatrice through humiliating rooms. Her Grace, Alistair said coldly. Of course. Her Grace. Lord Edmund made the title sound like an indulgence. Let us be practical. Society already wonders whether the Duchess pursued this marriage. A hearing of any kind, even a private legal proceeding, would feed the wolves. Allow me to protect her from that. Beatrice's hand tightened on the doorframe. Mr. Fenwick murmured something about settlement papers, confidentiality, and family reputation. Then Alistair spoke, and each word seemed forced through iron. If the full sum is restored and a written admission secured, Lord Edmund exhaled softly. An admission of administrative error. Nothing theatrical. Nothing that stains the family name. And the forged letter withdrawn from circulation. Misunderstandings happen. Young women copy phrases. Servants chatter. Let us not ruin Octavia over a girlish mistake. Silence followed. It lasted too long. Beatrice felt something inside her go very still. Alistair had not agreed, not yet. But he was considering it. He was standing before the very door she had begged him not to lock, holding a key in the name of mercy. She pushed the door open. 3 men turned. Lord Edmund paled first, which expressed more satisfaction. Alistair rose. Beatrice, how fortunate, she said. I arrived before my life was made tidy. Mr. Fenwick stood at once. Your Grace. Remain, Mr. Fenwick. I should like at least one witness who deals in ink rather than sentiment. Lord Edmund recovered. My dear child, this is precisely the agitation I feared. Do not call me a child in a room where you are attempting to purchase my silence. Alistair came around the desk. No one has agreed to anything. But you were listening. I was trying to measure the safest path. For whom? He stopped. Lord Edmund spread his hands. For you, Beatrice. If this continues, people will ask why you are so determined to blacken the name that sheltered you. Beatrice turned on him. Shelter is not the same as ownership. You have been poisoned against us. No. I have been educated by your care. His face hardened. You do not understand society. I understand it well enough. To know that a quiet settlement will make me look guilty, make Octavia look foolish rather than false, and make you look generous for returning a fraction of what was never yours. Mr. Fenwick's brows rose slightly. Alistair watched her with an expression she could not read. Beatrice faced him fully. That was harder. Anger at Lord Edmund was clean. Hurt with Alistair had roots. You would have let him call it an error. I would have kept you from being torn apart in public. I will not have my truth buried, so that my reputation may be displayed unbruised. His control cracked. I will not have my wife dragged through another room of wolves. The words filled the library. They were fierce, they were protective, they were wrong. Beatrice felt them enter the same wound that gratitude had occupied for years. Then stand beside me among them, she said. Do not lock the door. Alistair went silent. Lord Edmund saw the opening and stepped toward her. You are tired. You are overwrought. No one will blame you if His Grace decides you need rest. Alistair turned so quickly that Lord Edmund stopped. The Duke did not raise his voice. You will not suggest my wife is unstable again. Lord Edmund bowed, but his eyes glittered. As you wish. Beatrice looked from one man to the other and understood the battle had shifted. Lord Edmund wished to destroy her voice. Alistair wished to protect it so fiercely he nearly covered it with his own. Only one of those could learn better. She had to decide whether the risk was worth the hope. Mr. Fenwick, she said, if evidence exists in a prayer book now likely held by Lady Octavia, what is required? A witness to its recovery would be helpful, Your Grace. Several would be better. Then we shall arrange witnesses. Alistair looked at her. Where? Beatrice remembered the note on Lady Ashbourne's card, the room that had watched her humiliated and half believed the lie. If society had been invited to doubt her, society would be required to hear her. Lady Ashbourne receives again this week, she said. Lord Edmund will come if he believes he can finish what he began. Lord Edmund smiled faintly. And if I refuse? Beatrice met his eyes. You will not. Men who build cages always return to see whether the bird has stopped singing. For the first time, Alistair did not interrupt, command, or shield. He only stood beside her, silent and pale, as if he had finally understood that love without trust could still become a locked room. Beatrice turned to Mr. Fenwick. Send my acceptance to Lady Ashbourne. Then she looked back at her uncle. And send word that the Duchess of Harrowden has questions. By the following afternoon, Harrowden House had become quiet, in the way a room becomes quiet before a verdict. No servant hurried where footsteps might be heard. No tray rattled. Even the clocks seemed to measure themselves with caution. Beatrice stood in the small library beside the desk, where Alistair had first placed her mother's letter, and the silver thimble before her. And she looked down at the forged letter, Lady Ashbourne's acceptance, and a narrow list of names written in her own hand. Lord Edmund, Lady Drusilla, Lady Octavia, Mrs. Elspeth Rowe, Mr. Fenwick. Lady Ashbourne. Witnesses, enemies, and one room large enough to hold them all without pretending innocence. Alistair stood near the window, silent for so long that she began to feel the old shape of his protection gathering around her. He had said little since the confrontation in the library. That worried her more than argument would have done. The cold Duke in command was formidable. The silent husband learning restraint was unpredictable. You are deciding how to stop me, Beatrice said without looking up. No. His answer came at once. Too quickly perhaps, but not falsely. I am deciding how not to. She lifted her eyes. There is no graceful way to manage a woman you have promised not to manage. I am discovering that. He turned from the window. His face looked tired, but the old severity had softened into something more difficult to resist. Tell me the plan. Beatrice pushed the forged letter toward him. Lord Edmund wants a final room. He wants people to see me agitated, defensive, grateful for silence. We let him believe he will have it. And Octavia. Octavia wants to be pitied more than she wants to be innocent. If she thinks I am near collapse, she will adorn herself with whatever proves she was always the injured party. Including the prayer book, not the book itself. She is not foolish enough to carry it openly, but she keeps trophies, ribbons, notes, little things taken from other people because ownership comforts her. Beatrice touched the edge of the list. Mrs. Rowe said my mother tied the prayer book with a dark blue ribbon, 3 knots. If Octavia kept that ribbon, she will not understand what it reveals. Alistair's gaze sharpened. You mean to draw her into mentioning the keepsake box? Yes, in a crowded room. In a witnessed room. He drew a breath through his nose. She saw the resistance in him. She also saw him master it. What do you need from me? The question was plain. No command hiding beneath it. No solution already built. Beatrice felt it enter the place where his wrong choice had hurt her, and touch the bruise without pressing. Not rescue, she said. Witness. His eyes held hers. Only witness. If Lord Edmund reaches for me, you may become whatever the room fears most. Something almost like a smile moved across his mouth, then vanished. That is a generous allowance. Do not abuse it. I won't. The contraction, quiet and human, did more to unsteady her than any grand declaration. He moved closer, stop at the far side of the desk rather than crossing around it. Beatrice, I meant what I said in that library, but I said it badly. I fear the wolves. So do I. No, his voice lowered. I fear what I become when I imagine them near you. She could have answered sharply. She had earned the right. Instead, she looked at the thimble on the desk between them. Then become less certain and stay. He bowed his head once, not as a duke, but as a man accepting instruction. I trust you more than I trust my fear. For a moment the room held no scandal, no uncle, no forged hand, no missing prayer book, only that sentence. Only the strange tenderness of a powerful man setting down power because she had asked him to. Beatrice took the silver thimble and slipped it into her reticule. Then let us go disappoint them. Lady Ashbourne's drawing room was already full when they arrived. though the hour was not late. No hostess in London could resist becoming the stage upon which a scandal might either die or draw blood. Lamps glowed against gilt mirrors. Tea stood untouched on side tables. Chairs had been arranged in conversational clusters that fooled no one. People wished to stand. Standing made it easier to turn toward drama. Lady Ashbourne greeted Beatrice with a look that contained curiosity, admiration, and the shameless pleasure of a woman about to witness history, if dinner did not interfere. "Duchess," she said, taking both of Beatrice's hands. "How composed you are, how observant you are," Beatrice replied. Lady Ashbourne's smile deepened. "I have invited only those whose presence seemed useful. To whom, that remains to be seen." Alistair stood at Beatrice's shoulder, not before her. The difference mattered. She felt it as surely as she felt the reticule at her wrist. Across the room, Lord Edmund stood beside a marble-topped table, speaking with two older gentlemen who looked eager to be reasonable in whatever direction proved safest. Lady Drusilla sat near the fire with a shawl arranged over her lap, the very picture of a wounded aunt. Octavia stood by a tall vase of white roses, pale gold hair gleaming, gown of silver-grey silk chosen to suggest sorrow without surrender. Around her wrist was a dark blue ribbon. Beatrice saw it and went still, not very still, only enough that Alistair's hand, resting at his side, flexed once. The ribbon had been tied in 3 knots. Octavia saw Beatrice notice. A flicker of satisfaction touched her face because she mistook recognition for envy. "Beatrice," she said, drifting forward, "I am so glad you came. We were afraid, after all this unpleasantness, that you might prefer seclusion. You are often afraid on my behalf. Someone must be. How generous." Octavia lowered her lashes. "That sounds unkind." "No, it sounds experienced." A few people nearby shifted. Lord Edmund turned slightly, listening. "Good, let him listen." Beatrice looked at the ribbon again, then at Octavia's face. "That is a pretty colour." Octavia lifted her wrist at once. She could not help herself. "This? Only an old thing. I found it among family keepsakes." Lady Drusilla's fan stopped moving. There, Beatrice felt the room narrow to one blue thread. "Family keepsakes?" she asked lightly. "You have always been fond of them," Octavia smiled. "I have a sentimental nature. Yes, I remember. When we were girls, you kept the ivory comb my father gave me because you said it looked lonely in my drawer." A lady near the tea table gave a small cough. Octavia's smile tightened. "Children are silly, and yet you kept many things." Beatrice tilted her head. "Do you still have that rosewood keepsake box with the painted lid?" Lady Drusilla rose half an inch from her chair. "Octavia." Octavia heard the warning and disliked it. Pride did the rest. "Of course I have it. I don't throw away memories simply because others grow cold." Lord Edmund began to move toward them. But Lady Ashbourne intercepted him with a question about tea so smooth that Beatrice almost admired her. Beatrice kept her gaze on Octavia. "Then perhaps you kept the blue prayer book too." The room did not fall silent all at once. It happened in layers. A conversation died near the window. A spoon touched a saucer and did not lift again. Someone drew in a breath. Octavia's face lost color beneath its careful bloom. "I don't know what you mean." "No, how strange, Mrs." Rowe remembered it clearly. Lady Drusilla stood fully now. "This is most improper." "I agree," Beatrice said. "Stealing a dead woman's prayer book is improper." The words landed with more force because she did not raise her voice. Alistair remained where he was, behind her, present, unmoving witness. Lord Edmund freed himself from Lady Ashbourne and crossed the room with sorrow already arranged upon his face. "My niece is overwrought." We had hoped to avoid such a display. Beatrice looked at him then, and the fear she had expected did not come. She felt cold, clear. "You hoped to avoid witnesses." His eyes hardened for less than a second before grief returned. "Beatrice, this fixation on old objects and imagined injuries cannot continue. Then help it end. Ask Octavia to open her keepsake box." Octavia gave a brittle laugh. "My private possessions are not subject to your inspection, because you married a duke." Alistair's voice entered the room for the first time, low and even. "Her Grace has asked a question." It was not an order, It did not need to be. Rank moved through the room like a drawn curtain. Octavia looked at him, searching for the man she had refused, and perhaps expected to still desire her refusal. She found only the Duke of Harrowden standing beside his wife's truth. Her eyes flashed with humiliation. "You believe her?" "Yes, one word, nothing more." Beatrice felt it like a hand at her back. Lord Edmund stepped between them with exquisite timing. "Your Grace, surely we can discuss this as family. My niece has suffered a great strain. No one here wishes to embarrass her further." "Then stop speaking of me as if I am absent," Beatrice said. He turned toward her, and in his eyes she saw the decision form. He would not retreat now. He believed the room could still be bent by his tone, by his age, by his appearance of injured responsibility. He believed Beatrice would flinch before the final blow. Lady Ashbourne moved toward the center of the room, her expression bright with danger. "Perhaps, Lord Edmund, clarity would serve us all." "Indeed," he said softly, then louder for everyone. "Since my niece insists upon spectacle, let us give London the whole truth." Lord Edmund's declaration settled over Lady Ashbourne's drawing room like a hand laid over a candle flame. For one dangerous second, the room became obedient to him. People turned toward Beatrice, with that old familiar readiness, the hunger to watch a woman defend herself, and then call her desperation-proof. Lord Edmund unfolded a paper from his coat, with the sorrowful dignity of a man forced into ugliness by duty. "I would have spared my niece this," he said, voice low enough to sound pained and high enough to reach the windows. "But since she has chosen accusation over gratitude, I must say what the family has long feared. Beatrice desired this marriage. She resented my daughter. She imagined herself wronged when we tried only to guide her. The letter shown at the rout was not a cruelty. It was evidence of a mind fixed upon elevation." A murmur moved, then stopped when Alistair shifted half a step beside Beatrice. Not in front, beside. Beatrice let Lord Edmund speak. She watched his hands. They were steady, too steady, and now, he continued, she speaks of stolen prayer books, hidden papers, and conspiracies. One pities her. Sudden rank can unsettle even a better prepared young woman. Lady Drusilla pressed a handkerchief to her mouth. Octavia stood very still, the blue ribbon tied around her wrist like a small flag of victory and fear. Beatrice waited until Lord Edmund looked directly at her, inviting anger. She gave him none. "Have you finished, uncle?" she asked. His mouth tightened. "I have told the truth." "No," Beatrice said. "You have finished arranging it." The room drew a breath. She turned to Octavia. "Open your keepsake box." Octavia laughed too quickly. "I don't carry boxes to drawing rooms." "No. But Lady Ashbourne's footman fetched it from your carriage 10 minutes ago at your mother's request, because Lady Drusilla feared I might name it, and hoped to remove it quietly." Lady Drusilla made a small, strangled sound. Lady Ashbourne, who had been standing near the bell-pull, with the serene face of a woman who had arranged exactly that, lifted one hand. A footman entered carrying a rosewood box painted with faded violets. Octavia went white. Lord Edmund's voice sharpened. "This is outrageous." Alistair spoke then, calm and terrible. "Her Grace has asked a question." The footman placed the box on the center table. Beatrice did not touch it. "Open it, Octavia." "I won't." The contraction tore from her like a spoiled child's refusal, and several women looked away. Beatrice's voice remained quiet. "Then I shall ask Lady Ashbourne to witness your refusal." "Oh, for heaven's sake." Octavia snatched the key from her reticule with shaking fingers. "There. Let everyone see how little I have stolen from you." She opened the box. Ribbons lay inside, along with dried flowers, a broken fan guard, a miniature frame without a portrait, 2 ivory combs, and a blue leather prayer book so worn at the corners that Beatrice felt the room tilt. For years, she had thought she possessed almost nothing of her mother. Now the little book sat among Octavia's trophies, not cherished, not understood, merely taken. Silence widened. Lady Drusilla whispered, "Octavia." Octavia looked down as if seeing the book for the first time. "I didn't know it mattered." Beatrice picked it up with both hands. The blue ribbon had been tied around it in 3 knots. Her mother's caution, her mother's fear, her mother's hand reaching through time. "No," Beatrice said. "You only knew it was mine." She untied the knots. The leather binding showed a stitched line almost invisible along the inner cover. Beatrice opened her reticule and drew out the silver thimble. The scratched rim caught against the thread exactly as Mrs. Rowe had described. She used the edge to lift the seam, not tearing, only loosening what her mother had hidden with desperate care. A folded paper slid free. No one spoke. Even Lord Edmund seemed to have forgotten the shape of his next lie. Beatrice opened the paper. The handwriting was her mother's, not elegant from leisure, but pressed with urgency. "To my daughter, if no gentler road remains." Beneath the letter was a small account note bearing dates, sums, and names. Beatrice saw Lord Edmund Lydgate, written where it should never have been, Mr. Fenwick stepped forward from near the rear of the room, where he had waited at Beatrice's request. "Your Grace, may I examine it?" Beatrice handed it to him. Her fingers were cold, but they did not tremble. Mr. Fenwick read once, then again. His careful face grew grave. "This account note corresponds with the missing ledger reference held in the Harrowden files. The hand appears to be that of the late Countess Lydgate. The transfer noted here was not a gift to Lord Edmund. It was a trust provision intended for Lady Beatrice." Lord Edmund gave a short laugh. "A solicitor's guess over old ink, Mrs." Elspeth Rowe rose from the chair, where Lady Ashbourne had placed her near the fire. She looked small among silk and jewels, but her voice carried. "I saw the Countess stitch that paper into the prayer book," she said. "If Lord Edmund took the ledgers, at least one truth would remain where no man thought to look." Lady Drusilla stood. "This woman was a servant." "Yes," Mrs. Rowe said. "And servants see what families hide." The words struck harder because they were plain. Lord Edmund's composure began to fray at the edges. "This proves nothing of the letter shown at the rout." Beatrice turned to Octavia. Her cousin clutched the edge of the opened box. "No," Octavia whispered. "Don't." "The forged letter used the name B," Beatrice said. "Only 3 people in this room knew my mother called me that. One is dead. One is my aunt. The third is you." Octavia shook her head, tears rising now that they might be useful. "I only copied what Mama said." "I didn't mean for it to go so far," Lady Drusilla cried. "Octavia." The name sounded like a warning, not comfort. Beatrice looked at her aunt. "So it began with you." Lady Drusilla's face hardened. "You were never meant for this life." Octavia was. Everything had been prepared, and then you sat in her place as if patience were merit. "Patience was survival," Beatrice said. "And survival is not theft." Lord Edmund rounded on his wife. "Be silent." The command revealed more than the papers had. In that instant, the room saw not a grieving guardian, but a frightened man whose house of authority had begun to collapse because the women he used could no longer hold its walls. Alistair moved forward only enough for his voice to reach every corner. "Lord Edmund, Mr. Fenwick will begin proceedings regarding the trust. You will not approach my wife privately. You will not write to her except through solicitors. You will not call her unstable, ungrateful, or ambitious in any room where my name carries consequence." Lord Edmund's eyes flashed. "You cannot erase blood ties." "No," Beatrice said, "but I can stop mistaking them for chains." She faced the room then, the same kind of room that had watched her stand at an altar in another. Woman's place, the same kind of room that had nearly believed a forged letter because her ambition made a more interesting story than her pain. "I do not ask for pity," she said. "I do not ask anyone here to like me better than you did yesterday. I ask only that the truth be named. My mother tried to protect what was mine. My uncle took it. My aunt hid the traces. My cousin copied my hand to make me appear guilty of wanting what I had been forced to accept. That is the truth." Lady Ashbourne curtsied first. Not deeply enough to be theatrical, but deliberately enough to be seen. "Duchess." One by one, others followed with bows, lowered eyes, and careful silence. It was not affection. It was acknowledgement. And Beatrice had lived long enough without that to know its weight. Alistair turned toward her. The room waited, perhaps expecting him to claim the victory as a husband's rescue. Instead, he bowed his head. "I was wrong," he said. His voice was low, but absolute. "I thought I could protect you by making this smaller. You made it true." Beatrice felt the words reach a place in her that had been braced against him. He looked at the room, then back at her. "I married her first because I remembered her courage. I love her now because I have learned the cost of being worthy of it." The silence that followed was unlike any Beatrice had known. It did not humiliate, it held. Lord Edmund looked away first. Octavia sank into a chair, weeping softly into a handkerchief no one rushed to provide. Lady Drusilla stood rigid, stripped of the power to rename cruelty as concern. Mr. Fenwick gathered the papers with solemn care. The prayer book remained in Beatrice's hands. When it was over, when Lord Edmund was escorted out by silence rather than force, when Octavia and Lady Drusilla left without farewell, Alistair offered his hand. Then he stopped. He did not take hers. He waited. Beatrice looked at his hand, then at his face, and understood the gift of that pause. In the chapel she had been led. In the breakfast room she had been defended. In the library she had been protected badly and loved imperfectly. Now, before all the witnesses who had doubted her, she placed her hand in his by choice. "Take me home," she said. His fingers closed gently around hers. "Wherever you choose that to be." Spring came late to Morland Chase, as if Hampshire itself had wished to wait, until Lady Beatrice Vale was ready to believe in gentleness. For weeks after the drawing-room confrontation, the estate had lived under a quieter kind of upheaval. Letters passed between Mr. Fenwick and the proper officers. Lord Edmund Lydgate withdrew from London under the pretense of ill health, though society called it disgrace with unusual accuracy. Lady Drusilla followed him, her invitations thinning until even pity became too expensive to spend. Octavia went to an aunt in Yorkshire, where there were fewer mirrors and fewer people, willing to hear how innocence had been misunderstood. Beatrice did not celebrate their fall. That surprised some people. It surprised Octavia most of all, if the stiff note she sent from the north was any indication. But Beatrice had learned that justice was not always a shout. Sometimes it was a door, no longer opening to those who had once entered without knocking. The trust was restored in proper stages, with signatures, witnesses, and Mr. Fenwick's careful explanations, none of which Beatrice allowed to become the center of her days. Money mattered because it returned choice. It mattered because her mother had bled courage into ink to preserve it. It mattered because no woman should have to call dependence gratitude. Yet when the first account book was placed before Beatrice, in her own sitting room at Morland Chase, she did not feel rich. She felt addressed. "The funds are yours to direct, Your Grace," Mr. Fenwick said, standing beside the desk with his spectacles in hand. Alistair stood near the window, silent as he had promised to be, unless she asked otherwise. Beatrice looked at the neat columns, the sums reclaimed from years of concealment, and the new account opened in her married name with her consent written beside it. "Not mine alone," she said. Mr. Fenwick looked concerned. "Legally, Your Grace, the provision is secured to you. I know. That is why I may decide what it does." Across the room, Alistair's gaze lifted to hers. There was no command in it now, no fear disguised as control, only attention. Beatrice turned the page. "There are reduced gentlewomen in every county who know how to mend lace, embroider linen, keep accounts, teach children, and make themselves useful until usefulness becomes a prison. I should like a small workroom established here first. Paid work, proper records, no charity that humiliates the receiver." Mr. Fenwick blinked. "A practical arrangement, then, a dignified one," Beatrice corrected. When the first women came to Morland Chase a month later, they arrived cautiously, as if the house might change its mind about them after tea. Mrs. Miriam Sallows came too, carrying a basket, and pretending not to be proud when Beatrice asked her to oversee the quality of the needlework. The room chosen for them had once been unused and cold, looking over the kitchen garden where early herbs now pushed green through the earth. Beatrice ordered the windows washed, the table repaired, and the chairs cushioned with plain blue fabric. No one called it a charity room. She called it the workroom, and the name held. On the mantel she placed the blue leather prayer book, not as display, but as remembrance. Beside it lay the silver thimble engraved with B. Mrs. Sallows noticed it on the first morning, and touched her own worn needle case. "Your mother would have liked this, Your Grace." Beatrice looked at the women bending over linen in the clean spring light. Some were widows. Some were daughters of families that had spent too long pretending poverty could be hidden by good manners. All of them worked with concentration that looked almost like prayer. "I think," Beatrice said, "she would have asked whether the seams were even." Mrs. Sallows laughed. The sound moved through the room, and something in Beatrice loosened that no public vindication had touched. Later, that afternoon, a carriage arrived from Devon carrying Miss Lavinia Vale, who had been spoken of so often that Beatrice felt she knew her before they met. Lavinia was slight, dark-eyed, and still pale from the illness that had kept her from London. But when she entered the south drawing-room, she did not look first at her brother. She looked at Beatrice. "I remember you," she said. Alistair, standing by the hearth, went very still. Beatrice set down her tea. "You were never meant to." Lavinia crossed the room with both hands out. "I was frightened, and you made everyone look elsewhere. I had never understood until that day that kindness could be so quiet." Beatrice took her hands, moved by the certainty in the younger woman's voice. "I only did what anyone should have done." "No," Lavinia said with a firmness that made her sound briefly like her brother. "You did what many people praise, and very few people do." Alistair turned his face toward the window. Beatrice saw the motion. She had come to know the way he hid feeling, though he hid less now. Lavinia stayed 3 days. She walked with Beatrice through the workroom, admired the women's skill without condescension, and told Alistair at dinner that he looked less unbearable than usual. "Marriage has improved you," she said. Alistair lifted one eyebrow. "I was not aware improvement had been requested. It was desperately needed." Beatrice looked down at her plate to hide her smile. Under the table, Alistair's hand brushed hers once, not possessive, not secretive, simply there. He waited, as he always waited now. She turned her hand and touched his fingers in answer. The next morning, a packet of calling cards arrived from London. Lady Ashbourne's was first, written with dramatic affection. Others followed, from women who had watched the drawing-room reversal, and now wished to discover whether the Duchess of Harrowden received on Tuesdays. A few cards belonged to ladies who had whispered over the forged letter. One had called Beatrice fortunate with a mouth full of malice at the wedding breakfast. Mrs. Valewood brought the tray with an expression so neutral it bordered on art. "Shall I have replies prepared, Your Grace?" Beatrice looked through the cards. Once, she might have felt triumph. Once, she might have wanted every bowed head placed before her like an offering. Instead, she felt the calm distance of a woman who had crossed a river and did not need to drag the old bank behind her. "Lady Ashbourne may come next Thursday. Lady Markham may be told I am not receiving this month. The others may be answered with civility." Mrs. Valewood waited, and Lady Lydgate. On the tray lay one card without a note. Lady Drusilla had not written an apology. Of course she had not. The card itself was an experiment, a hand testing whether the door still recognized it. Beatrice looked at it for a long moment. No reply. Mrs. Valewood curtsied. "Very good, Your Grace." That evening, Alistair found Beatrice in the estate chapel, where late sunlight colored the stone floor and made the air seem older than sorrow. She stood near the front with no veil, no borrowed gown, and no audience. The small prayer book rested in her hands. He stopped at the door. "Am I intruding?" "No." He came forward slowly. "You looked as though you were speaking with someone." "I was listening." He stood beside her, close but not crowding. "To your mother, perhaps? Or to the girl I was before everyone told her silence was safer." Alistair looked toward the narrow window above the altar. "I owe that girl an apology. You did not know her." "No. But I benefited from the world that taught her to disappear." Beatrice turned to him. The chapel was quiet enough that she could hear the wind move along the old stone outside. "And I owe you an apology." His eyes returned to her at once. "For what?" "For believing at times that your fear meant you did not trust me at all. You were trying to learn a language no one had taught you. I was trying to make love look like command, because command was the only thing I knew how to trust." The confession settled between them, neither dramatic nor small. He reached into his coat and drew out a narrow ribbon, dark blue, newly woven but tied in 3 loose knots. "Lavinia said I should not offer jewelry. She said you would find symbolism irritating if it glittered too much." Beatrice stared at the ribbon, then laughed softly. "Your sister is wise." Alarmingly, he held it out. "Not to bind anything closed, to mark what has been opened." Beatrice took the ribbon. The silk lay light across her palm. For a moment she saw the first morning again, the torn veil, the carriage, the chapel filled with faces waiting for her to bow beneath the weight of being second. Then she looked at the man beside her, who had once tried to save her by locking doors, and had learnt, instead, to stand with her while she opened them. "I once thought I changed your fate by marrying you," Alistair said. His voice was low in the chapel hush. "I was arrogant enough to believe a name could rescue a life." Beatrice slipped the ribbon between the pages of her mother's prayer book. "No, you opened a door. I walked through it." He bowed his head, and when he looked at her again, the coldness that had once made rooms wary of him was gone from his eyes. Not gone from his nature, perhaps. It still guarded him. It still gave him strength. But it no longer stood between them. "Will you walk with me now?" he asked. Beatrice placed the prayer book beneath her arm and held out her hand. "Yes, but not behind you." His fingers closed gently around hers. Never again. They left the chapel together, not before witnesses, not beneath applause, not as a duke displaying the wife he had defended, but as 2 people who had learned the cost of being believed. In the workroom, the silver thimble rested on the mantel beside the account book, Beatrice now kept in her own hand. In the garden, the first pale flowers had opened along the path to the south lawn. Morland Chase no longer seemed too large for her. It had rooms she had chosen, work she had shaped, voices she had welcomed, and a husband who waited at her side rather than ahead of her. Beatrice stepped into the evening light, the house warm behind her, the future unwritten before her, and understood at last that she had not been mended by becoming a duchess. She had mended the meaning of the title by refusing to disappear inside it.